She pulled the ring off her finger and dropped it on his desk like it burned her. It rolled once, wobbled, and lay still in the lamplight, the only thing she left behind in the richest house in Virginia. No note, no tears, just a broken piano key wrapped in her dead mother's handkerchief pressed to her chest, and her back already turned to the door where an hour before she'd heard her own husband say he wished she'd never been born into his life. If you love a woman who stops begging to be believed and finally walks subscribe, stay to the end and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. You'll ruin your eyes. Clara Whitmore didn't look up from the ledger. My eyes are fine, Delia. It's 4 a.m. Then the numbers have been lying to somebody for a good long while, and they can lie a little longer while I catch them at it. She dipped her pen. Set the coffee down. Don't spill it on the column. Delia set the cup down and didn't leave. She'd cooked in Ashford Hall 40 years long before there was a mistress in the house at all, and she'd earned the right to stand where she pleased. What column? This one. Clara turned the book a half-inch out of habit, though she knew the old woman couldn't read past her own Christian name. You buy 40 head of cattle in the spring, you pay for 60. Next season you hire 12 men to bring in the tobacco, you pay wages for 20. Delia, a body does that once it's a mistake. A mistake runs both ways, too much here, too little there. It evens out over a year like water finding level. This don't even out, this only ever runs one direction. Out of the house and into somebody's pocket. Whose pocket? That, Clara said, is what I aim to find before the sun's up. Delia's face did the thing Clara had watched it do for 3 years now, that careful closing like a shutter drawn against weather. You want to mind who you say that to, child? I'm not a child. I'm 24 and married 3 years. Married, Delia said, ain't the same as safe, not in this house. Clara set down her pen. That was closer to plain speaking than Delia had ever come, and the two women looked at each other across the little table in the cold morning kitchen, and something passed between them that neither one put words to. Who, Clara said slowly, would you say I ought to mind? But Delia only picked up her rag and turned to the stove the way she always did when the truth got too near, and she said the thing she'd been saying for 3 years instead. Drink your coffee before it's cold. Clara had come to Ashford Hall the way a debt gets paid quietly, and because there was no other choice. She'd been 21 and her father was dying, and the creditors were circling the failing farm like buzzards over a downed calf. And Nathaniel Ashford had walked into their bare parlor one gray afternoon, looked at the accounts spread across the table, and asked the only question any man had ever asked that made her feel he saw her standing there. Who keeps these books? I do, she'd said. He'd studied her a long moment. Tall, cold, 32 years old, and already the wealthiest landholder in that part of Virginia, already justice of the county. A man who could ruin a family, or save one with the same flat look. They're kept well, he'd said. And then to her father, not to her, I'll settle what's owed, and I'll marry the girl if she'll have me. She's a head for figures. I've use for that in a wife. Use, not love. She'd known it going in. She'd told herself use was a foundation a body could build on. That respect might warm into something softer, the way a hard seed goes soft in the ground. She had been very young. 3 years later she sat over his books at 4 a.m. and understood the seed had never once been planted at all. She worked until the window went gray. And when the gray came, she had it laid out in her small even hand, plain enough that a shout would only have muddied it the way her father had taught her. You don't shout, Clara girl. You lay it so plain a fool could follow it. Somebody had been bleeding Ashford Hall for 2 years. Not in great gulps a man would notice, but in the seams. Overpaid invoices. Laborers on the wage book who'd never lifted a hoe. A grist mill billed for the same roof 3 separate times in a single season. And twice in the margin beside the worst of it a second hand. Fine. Looping. A woman's hand. Approved. M. A. Clara sat back and pressed her cold fingers to her mouth. Well, she said to the empty room. Well now, there you are. She was still sitting with it when the door opened without a knock. You've been shut up in here all night. Margaret Ashford filled the doorway the way weather fills a sky, near 60 straight as a fence rail gray from collar to hem since the day her own husband was buried. She had a way of saying Clara's name that made it sound like a small correction. People will talk, Clara. They'll say I keep my nephew's wife locked away like a mad woman in a novel. I've been working, ma'am. Working. Margaret came in. Her eyes went over the table, the open books, the copied figures, the ink still wet, and Clara watched her see it and watched her face do precisely nothing and learned more from that nothing than she'd have learned from a scream. You've developed a great fondness for other people's accounts. They're my husband's accounts. They are this family's accounts. A small weight on family, a word Margaret used the way a woman uses a door to open or to shut against you as it suited her. Kept safe a long while before you came to us, child, with your dead father's debts and your one good dress. The cruelty was so smooth, so worn with handling, that a lesser woman would have missed the fear underneath it. Clara did not miss it. She'd spent 3 years learning to hear the thing beneath the thing. She turned the page. She set one finger on the looping ink. You signed here, ma'am. Repairs to the mill, $1,500. She looked up. The mill roof still leaks. I stood under it myself in the last hard rain and got wet to the shift. For one breath, one single breath, Margaret Ashford's composure cracked at the corner. Clara saw the animal move behind the old woman's eyes. Then it shut. You'll want to be careful, Margaret said, very soft. Carrying a tale you haven't the standing to finish. My nephew has no patience for a hysterical woman. He married you for your steadiness. It would be a great pity, Clara, if he came to believe he'd been mistaken in that. Is that a warning, ma'am? Margaret smiled. It never reached above her mouth. It's a kindness. You'll learn the difference in time, if you're given time. She turned and went unhurried, her footfalls even down the long hall, and Clara sat with her heart slamming against her ribs and understood 2 things at once. She'd just confirmed an enemy she had only suspected, and she was right, which in that house was the most dangerous thing a woman could be. She didn't have an hour to sit with it. Benjamin Carter came before the breakfast dishes were cleared. He was a handsome man of 30 or so, and he'd learned young that a smile opens more doors than a key ever will. 6 years he'd kept the estate's books and correspondence. He called Nathaniel Sir and Margaret Ma'am, and Clara always Mrs. Ashford, with a small dip of the head, as though the words were a courtesy he was doing her out of the goodness of his heart. Mrs. Ashford. The dip, the smile. Miss Delia tells me you've a question or two about the accounts. I'd be glad to set your mind at ease. All those columns, they'll turn a person's head clean around. My head sits straight enough, Mr. Carter. Course it does, ma'am. He came a step nearer and pitched his voice low and warm, the voice a man uses on a horse that's fixing to bolt. I only mean the estate's a big animal. What strikes a fresh eye as an error is most often just the way a thing's always been done. Take the mill. Those repairs run through a firm out of Richmond. Complicated arrangement. I'd hate for a small confusion to grow up into a great worry over nothing at all. The roof leaks. The smile held, just held. Roofs do, ma'am. You build the estate to fix it 3 times in one season. Same roof, same firm. Did I now? He tilted his head all open and easy, and Clara felt the ground shift under her. Felt how good he was at this, how a man like him could take the very truth out of her hand and turn it in front of witnesses into the raving of a woman who didn't understand men's business. I'll look into it directly. You've my word on it. I don't want your word. I want the books that came before I did. The old ones. They're kept in Mr. Ashford's study. Something crossed behind his eyes. Fast as a fish in dark water. Gone. Well, now those'd be Mr. Ashford's to give, he said gently. Not mine to hand round, ma'am, and not, you'll forgive me, yours to ask after. They're my husband's. I'm his wife. His. You are. He said it like he was agreeing to something out of charity. And a wife's a great comfort to a busy man, long as she stays a comfort. Another dip of the head. I'll bid you good morning, Mrs. Ashford. Do try to rest. You look a mite worn. He was gone before she could answer. Clara sat very still. He's frightened, she thought. Margaret's frightened, and now Carter's frightened, and there is nothing in this world more dangerous than two thieves who've just learned they've been counted. She thought, I have to tell Nathaniel. Tonight. To his face with the books open on the desk between us. She thought, he married me for my steadiness. He said so with his own mouth. Whatever else we are or aren't to each other, he knows I don't lie and I don't guess. He'll hear me. She held on to that the whole long day, the way a woman holds a candle across a dark yard, cupping the little flame with her hand against the wind. She didn't yet know the wind had already put it out. She had one ally in that house who wasn't Delia, though she'd never have called him an ally out loud. His name was Amos, and he'd worked the Ashford stables since he was a boy, and he had a way of seeing everything from the corner of a barn and saying none of it. She found him at the trough that afternoon, and she hadn't meant to say anything, but he spoke first low, without looking up from the horse he was watering. "You've been asking about the mill, Ms. Ashford." She went still. "Who told you that?" "Nobody tells me nothing. That's how I hear it all." He ran his hand down the horse's neck. "That mill roof ain't been touched in 2 years. I know 'cause I hauled the shingles myself the once, and they're the same shingles and half of 'em's rotted through. Whatever got paid for that roof?" He stopped. His jaw worked. "It didn't buy no shingles. That's all I know, and I don't know it if you take my meaning." "I take it, Amos. There's more." He glanced up just once, and there was something frightened and decent warring in his old face. "Mr. Carter, he burns papers, reg'lar. Out back of the smokehouse after dark. A clerk that's got nothing to hide don't burn his own writing in the dark, ma'am. Would you say so? If it came to it, would you say what you saw? The fear won. It always won in men who had everything to lose and nothing to fall back on." He looked back down at the horse. "I got a wife," Amos said quietly, "and 4 little ones, and this here's the only work in the county. A word from Mr. Ashford and we're on the road with what we can carry." He shook his head. "I can't say nothing, Ms. Ashford, but you found it your own self. You don't need me to say it. You just need somebody with a name worth more'n mine to listen. Somebody with a name worth listening to." She thought of one name. Only one. "Thank you, Amos," she said. "You never told me a thing. I was never here." "No, ma'am," he said, grateful, ashamed. "You surely weren't." She dressed for supper with a care she hated herself for. 3 years married, and she still tried. Still put on the blue dress he'd once a single time said suited her. Still did her hair the way she'd worn it the first evening he looked at her a beat longer than a man needs to. Hope was a stubborn weed. It came up through stone. Supper was near silent, as it always was. Nathaniel ate the way he did all things, with a still and total attention that had nothing to do with the people at his own table. Margaret spoke of the drought and the Harmons' new carriage and the sermon coming Sunday, and never once looked at Clara, which was its own kind of message. "You're quiet tonight," Nathaniel said to Clara near the end. It was the first thing he'd said to her directly in 2 days. "I've a matter to put before you," she said. "After supper, in private. It won't wait." He nodded and returned to his plate, and Clara saw Margaret's eyes flick between the two of them, quick as a snake's tongue tasting the air, and she knew in her marrow that Margaret would not permit that private conversation to happen if there was breath in her body to stop it. She was right about that, too. Nathaniel went to his study after supper, as he did every night of his life. Clara gathered her papers. She steadied herself at the foot of the stairs, one hand on the banister, and she said a small wordless thing that was almost a prayer, not to God exactly, but to whatever it is in a person that hopes against all evidence. Then she walked the long hall to his door, and stopped. Because he was not alone. Because through the heavy door, low and urgent, came a voice she knew, and the first word out of it was her own name. "Clara has been through the books, Nathaniel. All of them. She's got some fixed notion lodged in her head. She confronted me this morning in my own person and made accusations. Against Mr. Carter. Against me." Clara's raised hand stopped an inch from the wood. A pause. Then her husband's voice flat and even. The justice's voice, not the man's. What manner of accusations? Theft, if you can credit it. Pages of it. Columns and figures and God knows what nonsense she's built up in the dark. Nephew, I say this because I loved your mother, and because I have watched over this family longer than that girl's been alive. The child is not well. Clara's hand began to shake. Not well, Nathaniel repeated. Not a question, just weighing it. You've seen it yourself. The hours she keeps. Shut up alone before dawn muttering over accounts that aren't her concern. She invents patterns where the Lord himself put none. Now she's turned on Mr. Carter, who's given 6 faithful years to this house, and she's turned on me. And I'll tell you what I fear, though it grieves me to say it. Margaret's voice dropped, and Clara had to strain to hear the lie that would break her. I fear it's the very sickness that took her mother at the last. You know the Whitmore blood, Nathaniel. Everyone in the county knew what became of the mother's mind before the end. It was a lie. Clara's mother had died of a fever in the lungs, coughing blood into a rag, clear-eyed to the final hour, singing hymns so soft they were half-breath. But it was a lie built to fit the space cut and fitted like a coffin board, and Clara stood outside the door and heard it slide neatly into the place where the truth ought to have gone, and she heard her husband say nothing to stop it. Say she's wrong. Clara begged him behind the door without a sound. Say you know your wife. Say a man ought to hear a thing before he judges it. Say you'll open the door and take the papers from my hand. Say one word. Just one. I haven't the time for this, Nathaniel said. Not she's wrong. Not I'll hear her. Only the trouble of it. Only the weary inconvenience of a wife who ought to have stayed a comfort. I know, my dear, Margaret soothed. You carry the whole county on your back, and now this on top of it. A wife who was meant to ease your burdens, making herself the heaviest of them. And then Nathaniel Ashford said the words. He didn't shout them. That was the thing Clara would carry to her grave. He said them low and tired, and utterly without heat, the way a man states a fact he's held so long and so deep he no longer troubles to feel it. Sometimes, he said, I wish Clara Whitmore had never entered this house. Clara Whitmore. Not my wife, not Clara, not even Mrs. Ashford. Clara Whitmore, the girl he'd bought out of a dying man's parlor. As though the 3 years between had been an accounting error, he was still working to reconcile. As though she were a debt he wished, on quiet reflection, he had never agreed to settle. She did not cry. That was the strange and terrible thing she would remember all her life, that in the moment the whole floor of the world dropped away beneath her, she made no sound at all. Something in her had been braced for this so long that when at last it came, it landed almost gently. The way a body that's been falling a very great while finally softly meets the ground. She lowered her hand. She looked down at the papers pressed against her chest, all her careful, honest, sleepless work, and she understood with a clarity that was almost peaceful that there was no one on the other side of that door to give them to. A man who wished aloud that you had never been born into his life would not read your columns. He would only find in them one more reason to be sorry he'd let you through his gate. She took one slow step back from the door, then another, and she turned and walked away down the long, dark hall, and she was very calm, and the calm was 1,000 times worse than weeping. Delia found her in her room an hour later, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap, and her face wiped clean of everything a face is meant to hold. Child, Delia set down the lamp. You look like you seen clear to the far side of something. I heard him, Clara said. Heard who? My husband. She said the 2 words with no weight at all, the way you'd name a town you were already leaving. I stood at his door to lay the truth before him, and I heard him tell his aunt that he wishes I had never entered his house. Delia's whole face crumpled. Old as she was, hard as she'd grown, it crumpled like a girl's. Oh, now. Oh, child, no. Men say fool cruel things when they're wore down to the nub. He never meant... He meant it, Delia. You can't know. That's the very thing. Clara looked up and her eyes were dry and clear and terrible. If he'd shouted it, if he'd flung it hot in a temper, I could tell myself it was the anger talking and not the man. But he said it quiet. He said it the way you'd say the sky is blue. A body doesn't say a thing that way, unless he's believed it a long, long time in a place down so deep even he can't reach it to check. Delia sank down onto the bed beside her, the fight going out of the old woman all at once. For a long moment neither spoke. "What'll you do?" Delia finally whispered. And there it was. The question that had been forming in Clara for 3 years and could only now, with the whole house burned down to the foundation, at last be answered. "I'm going to leave," Clara said. "Leave?" Delia's hand flew to her mouth. "Leave to where, child, on what you got? No people left living. You got no money that the law calls your own. Every coin you'd touch belongs to him. That's the law of it. You walk out on a man like Nathaniel Ashford, and you walk out with the clothes on your back and nothing else, and the whole county will name you the very thing that woman's already whispering you are. A thief, a madwoman, a wife that up and abandoned a good and generous husband. I know what they'll name me. Then how in the Lord's name can you? Because I know what I am." Clara stood, and as she stood, some weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there slid clean off her back, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt herself standing all the way up to her full height. "I have 2 hands. I can keep a set of books cleaner than any man in this state, and you know it's so. I can teach music. I can read and cipher and manage a household or a farm or a store. I have a strong back and a clear head, and I have a name my own father gave me before ever a man handed me one to borrow and take back. Clara. And I have the one thing this house was never able to touch." Her voice didn't rise. It went lower and steadier, and it frightened Delia more than shouting ever could. "I know the truth. I know I'm not mad, not now, not ever, and not like my mother who died as sane as Sunday. And I do not need Nathaniel Ashford's leave to know it." Delia stared at her a long moment. And then, slowly, the grief in the old face gave way to something older and fiercer beneath it. Something like the look a mother gives a child she's just watched take its first steps clear across the room and not fall. "Your mama," Delia said thickly, "would be so proud right now she couldn't stand up straight to say it." For one instant, Clara's composure trembled just once at the word mama. Then it held. "Help me," she said. "There's little time. He rises at first light." She took almost nothing. That was the part that would haunt Nathaniel Ashford longest in the days to come, though he could not have known it yet how little she carried out his door. A woman who'd been robbing him blind. A woman driven mad with greed, as Margaret would be telling the whole county by week's end. Such a woman would have stripped the place bare. The silver, her jewels, a matched pair from the stable. Clara took a change of clothes. Her mother's shawl and a little bread wrapped in a cloth that Delia pressed into her hands, weeping too hard to speak. And she took the piano key. It was a broken thing. A single ivory key snapped off an instrument long since sold to satisfy her father's creditors, and her mother had pressed it into her palm the winter before she died, wrapped in a square of linen. "So you'll always keep one note of the song," her mother had said, already too weak to sit up, even after they've carried off all the rest. Clara had kept it 3 years in a drawer in that grand and lonely house, the one true thing among 100 fine things that had never once belonged to her. She wrapped it now in the same yellowed linen and pressed it flat against her heart. She did not take the wedding ring. She sat at the little writing desk in the gray before dawn and worked it off her finger. It came easy. It had been loose a long while. She'd lost flesh that year without ever noticing the way a body sheds what it hasn't the strength to carry. She held it a moment in her open palm. Heavy, gold, and never once in 3 years the thing it was meant to be. She thought about a letter. She'd composed a dozen through the sleepless night. "You will find the whole truth in the books. Benjamin Carter and your aunt have bled this estate 2 years running, and I found them at it, and I came to tell you, and you would not hear me." But a letter was a plea. A letter was a woman still standing at a closed door, still cupping the guttered candle, still asking a man to please believe her. She was done asking, so she left no words at all. She set the ring down in the center of the bare desk square in the light where a man could not fail to find it. And she took her hand away and did not touch it again. The papers she did not leave in the study where Margaret might come upon them and feed them to the smokehouse fire. She gave them into Delia's keeping, sealed with a candle's wax, and with them a single instruction. If the day ever comes, Clara said, that he asks after the truth honestly, not to save his estate, not to quiet his conscience, but because he wants to know, you give him these, not one day before. And if he never asks honest, Delia said, then he never gets them. Clara pressed the old woman's hands. The truth is not a gift a woman owes to a man who won't want it. She kissed Delia's wet cheek. She took up her small bundle, and she walked out of the finest house in Ashford County in the last dark, before the birds began down the long drive beneath the black and motionless trees, and she did not look back at the lit and unlit windows, and she did not cry. And by the time the first gray light came creeping up over the tobacco fields, she was already a full mile gone down the Richmond Road. A woman alone. A broken piano key against her heart, and the whole unwritten rest of her life spread open before her, like a field nobody had yet plowed. Shoptug. Nathaniel Ashford woke at his usual hour. The house was quiet. That was the first thing, though it took him some minutes to name it. Not the silence of something gone wrong, but the silence of something simply gone. The way a clock stopped in the night leaves a hole in a house that a man can feel before he can place. He dressed. He came down. Delia stood at the stove with her back to him, and her back was stiff as a barn door, and she did not turn when he came in, and she did not say good morning. "Where's my wife?" he said. "She told me last evening she wished to speak with me on some matter. I'll take my coffee in the study. Send her in." The old woman's shoulders went very still. "She's gone, Mr. Ashford." "Gone where?" "To the Harmons at this hour. Gone." Delia turned around. Her old face was wet, and her old eyes were hard as struck flint, and Nathaniel Ashford felt for the first time in more years than he could readily count a small cold finger touch the back of his neck. "Gone in the night, sir. She took near nothing at all, and she went before first light, and I do not expect she'll be coming back up that road." He didn't understand it. A man like Nathaniel Ashford wasn't built to understand such a thing quickly. His whole mind ran on causes and their consequences, on contracts and their outcomes, and a wife simply walking out of the wealthiest house in the county into nothing. For no reason a ledger could account for, it did not compute. It fell clean outside the arithmetic of his entire life. "That's absurd," he said. "She has no money. She has no people. Where in God's name would she—" "There it is," Delia said, and her voice shook, but not with grief. "There it is again, plain as morning. You're already counting up what she's got and what she hasn't got. Same as you counted it the day you bought her out of her daddy's parlor. In 3 years, Mr. Ashford, you never once got around to counting what she was." "Delia, go on and look in your study." The old woman turned back to her stove. "Go look on your desk, and then don't you speak to me no more this morning, for I haven't got it in me." He went. The study was as he'd left it. The lamp, the ledger locked in its drawer, his chair drawn out, and on the bare desk, dead in the center, catching the first thin light through the window, a small circle of gold. Nathaniel Ashford stood in the doorway a long moment. Then he crossed the room slow and picked it up and turned it in his fingers. He waited for the anger. That would have been the natural thing, anger at the impertinence of it, at the scandal it would breed, at the sheer inconvenience. He was a man who handled trouble the way other men handle weather, and anger was the tool his hand knew best. But the anger didn't come. What came instead, standing there with his dead marriage cold in his palm, was a single thought, and it rose up out of a place in him so deep and so long shut that he hadn't known the place was there. And it would not leave him again for a very long time. She said she had something to tell me, and I told her I hadn't the time. He set the ring down. He picked it up again. He was still holding it when Margaret came in. Nephew. All composure. All tender concern. "Delia's in a dreadful state below stairs. She says the girls run off in the night." I confess I'm not the least surprised. I warned you, didn't I, only yesterday? The child was not well. Better she's gone now before she did some real and lasting harm to the family's name. We'll send quiet word to Richmond. Let it be understood she took poorly and went off to relations to convalesce. No one need ever know more than, she has no relations, Nathaniel said. Margaret paused half a breath. Well, no, but the county needn't be troubled with that particular. He looked at his aunt. He looked at her a long time longer than he'd truly looked at her in years, and something in his face made her practiced smile go thin at the edges. She wanted to tell me something, he said. Last evening before supper, she said it to my face. She had papers, books. His voice was level, the justice's voice, but there was a new thread pulled tight beneath it that had not been there the night before. And you came to me an hour later and told me she'd made accusations. Against Carter. Against you. And you told me she was mad, and I said I hadn't the time. You were weary, my dear, and rightly so, and now she is gone. He set the ring down on the desk, careful exact as though it might shatter. She left everything, she took nothing, and a woman gone mad with theft. Margaret, a woman driven off her senses by greed, she does not leave the gold lying on the desk and walk out into the dark with 2 empty hands. Margaret's composure was a fortress 60 years in the building, and it did not fall. But it thinned, and Nathaniel Ashford, who read men and figures for his living, watched it thin. You're overwrought, she said. You've had a shock. You are not thinking as yourself. Where are the account books she was working from, Margaret, the old ones? How on earth should I know? Ask Mr. Carter, he keeps the... I'm not asking Mr. Carter, I'm asking you, and I find I'm very interested that your first word was his name. The old woman and the man she had half raised stood facing each other across the study in the strengthening light, and between them on the desk lay a small gold ring that neither one would put a hand to, and somewhere a mile down the Richmond road, and getting farther by the minute, walked the one living soul who could have told either of them plain and true exactly what was rotting at the heart of their house. Nathaniel turned from his aunt without another word. He went down to the stable and saddled his own horse, which he had not troubled to do with his own hands in years, and his hands remembered the work while his mind ran on ahead of him down the road. He found Amos there forking hay, and the man went stiff as a post at the sight of him. You're up early, sir. My wife is gone, Amos, in the night. Did you see anything? Hear anything? A wagon? A rider? Anything at all? And Amos, who had a wife and 4 little ones, and the only work in the county, Amos looked at the wealthiest, most powerful man for 40 miles, the man who could put his whole family on the road with a single word, and Amos found that he could not, this one time, make the lie come out of his mouth. No, sir, he said. I didn't see which way she went. That much was true. Then he drew a breath and risked it all on the next part. But I'd look to her own good sense if I was you, Mr. Ashford. She's got more of it than most. Whatever's drove her off. He stopped. His hands worked on the fork handle. A woman like that don't run from nothing. She only ever runs to something, or away from a thing that's gone bad past bearing. That's all I got to say, sir. That's all I know. Nathaniel stared at the man a long moment. It was the most anyone in his own household had said to him true in a very long time, and it had come from the mouth of a stable hand. Thank you, Amos, he said, and his voice was not the justice's voice. It was only a man's. He led the horse out into the white morning. He did not yet know what he would find down that road. He did not know that the woman he'd set out to find had no intention of ever being found. He did not know that when at last he did find her, and he would in time, for a man like Nathaniel Ashford does not stop, she would look him level in the eye and speak the truest, hardest words a proud man was ever made to stand and hear. He knew only one thing, cold and sure, and spreading through him like a hard winter come down in the middle of July. He had wished aloud in his own house at his own hearth that she had never entered his life, and she had heard every word of it, and she had believed him enough to go. He swung up into the saddle. And behind him, the great house of Ashford stood exactly as it had always stood, every board, every brick, every fine and costly thing inside it whole, and accounted for the wealthiest house in the whole of the county, wanting for nothing under heaven. Wanting for nothing at all. Except the one woman who had held it upright with her own 2 hands, and who was already gone, and who was not this time coming back for any man's asking. He rode the Richmond road till the horse was lathered, and the sun stood straight overhead. And he asked at every farm gate and every crossroad store, and he did not find her. "A woman on foot," he said to the man at the toll bridge, "alone, would have passed before dawn. Dark hair, carrying a small bundle." The tollman scratched under his hat. "Mister, I seen 100 souls cross since the birds woke up. You describe a wife or a runaway. My wife. Then you'd know her face better'n a stranger would." The man spat. "Reckon if she wanted you to find her, she'd have left you a road to follow. You find one." Nathaniel had no answer to that. He turned the horse and rode on, and the tollman's words rode with him the whole afternoon, because they were true, and because he was not a man accustomed to being handed the truth by a stranger at a bridge. She had left him no road. She had left him a ring. He came home after dark with the horse spent, and himself worse, and he did not go in to supper. He went to his study, and he lit the lamp, and he sat down at the desk where the ring still lay, and for the first time in his adult life, Nathaniel Ashford did not know what to do next. So he did the only thing a man like him knew how to do. He opened the books. He worked till the candle guttered. And somewhere past midnight, bent over columns he'd signed for years without once truly reading. Nathaniel Ashford began to understand what his wife had understood in a single night. The mill. He found it the way she'd found it, not by looking for it, but by refusing to look away. Repairs billed in April. Billed again in June. Billed a 3rd time in August. Same roof. Same Richmond firm. And when he turned back a year and then 2, the pattern rose up off the page at him like a face out of dark water. Cattle bought, and half of them never fed. Wages paid to men who had never once drawn breath on Ashford land, and in the margin twice in a hand he'd known his whole life, a hand that had signed his own boyhood report cards and his mother's death notice approved. M. A. Nathaniel set the pen down very slowly. "No," he said to the empty room. He said it the way a man says it, when he already knows. He was still sitting there gray-faced when the study door opened without a knock. "You'll wear yourself to nothing, nephew, poring over figures at this hour." Margaret came in with a candle of her own, all soft concern. "Come to bed. The estate will keep till morning. It always has." "Sit down, Margaret." Something in his voice stopped her 3 steps into the room. She did not sit. "I've been reading the books," he said. "Have you?" Just the smallest hitch. "That's the clerk's work, Nathaniel. A man of your position oughtn't strain his eyes over—" "The mill roof," he said, "was repaired 3 times last year, by the same firm. I paid for all 3. I stood at that mill last spring, Margaret, and got rained on through the roof I'd paid 3 times to mend." He looked up at her. "Explain that to me. You signed for 2 of the 3. Your own hand. Explain it, and I'll beg your pardon, and we'll never speak of it again." The candle in Margaret Ashford's hand did not so much as tremble. That was the thing he'd remember. A guilty woman's hand shakes. His aunt's did not. "I sign a great many things Mr. Carter puts before me," she said smoothly. "As did you before this sudden fit of scholarship. If there's an error, it's his to answer for, not mine. I trusted him. We both did." She tilted her head, and her voice went gentle, terribly gentle. "You've had a hard day chasing all over the county after a woman who didn't want to be caught. You're seeing plots in the shadows, Nathaniel. It's grief. It'll pass." "I'm not grieving. I'm reading." "You're grieving," she said, "and you don't even know the name for it because you never learned. Go to bed." And she turned and left him there, unhurried, her candle steady as a church, and Nathaniel Ashford sat with 2 years of theft spread open under his hands and understood that he had just been managed the same way he now suspected he had been managed for a very long time. 60 miles east in a small brick town on the James River. Clara Whitmore was learning how much a woman was worth when nobody knew whose wife she'd been. She'd walked 2 days and ridden a farmer's wagon a third, and she'd come into the town of Merrow's Field with a broken piano key, a changing of clothes, and a name she'd made up on the road because her own was too dangerous to carry. Clara Reed, she told the woman at the boarding house. It had been her mother's maiden name. It felt like putting on a coat that fit. You got references, Ms. Reed. No, ma'am. I've got 2 hands and a head for figures, and I'll pay you a week in advance to prove I'm no trouble. She set her last coins on the counter. After that, I'll have work, or I'll be gone, and either way, you'll not have lost a thing on me. The landlady, a widow named Ada Pruitt, looked at the coins, and then longer at the woman, and something in Clara's straight back and level eye must have spoken, because Ada swept the coins into her apron and said, "Top of the stairs, back room. Supper's at 6, and I don't hold it for stragglers." It was the first door in Clara's whole life that had opened to her on nothing but her own word. She stood in the little back room that night, no bigger than a pantry with a rope bed and a cracked wash basin, and she took the piano key out of its handkerchief and set it on the sill. And she did not cry then either, though it would have been the natural time for it. She looked at the one white key against the dark glass, and she thought, all right, 1 note. We begin with 1 note. By the end of her first week, she had work. She got it the way she got everything, by seeing what others walked past. The general store was run by a man named Josiah Bell, a big, slow, careful man whose accounts were a disaster of scrawled chits and unpaid tabs, and Clara stood at his counter 3 days running, buying thread she didn't need, and watching him lose money he couldn't afford. "Mr. Bell," she finally said, "you carried the Hendersons $4 on credit last month, and you wrote it down twice so your book says 8. And you sold Mrs. Todd a bolt of calico this morning and never wrote it down at all. You're bleeding money out of both ends and you don't even know which end." Josiah Bell blinked at her. "And how'd you come to know my business, Ms. Reed?" "Because I stood here and watched, and I know how to read a column." She lifted her chin. "I'll set your book straight for the price of my supper, and if you like the work, you'll pay me proper after. If you don't, you'll have lost 1 meal. That's the whole of the risk to you." He gave her the meal. And the following week, he gave her the job and a set of keys to the store's back office. Because Josiah Bell was not a fool, and a man who's watched a stranger find $8 he'd lost knows the difference between charity and value. She taught piano besides 3 girls whose mothers had ambitions on Ada Pruitt's parlor instrument an hour after supper. She was careful. She kept her head down. She was Clara Reed, the quiet widow who kept Bell's books and gave music lessons, and nobody in Merrow's Field knew she'd ever been anything more, and that suited her clear down to the ground. It could have gone on like that. That was the thing she'd think of later. It very nearly did. Back at Ashford Hall, Nathaniel Ashford was doing a thing he had never once done in his life. He was watching his own clerk. He said nothing. He changed nothing. He went on signing what Carter put in front of him, and nodding at Margaret across the supper table, and all the while, he watched the way he'd told Amos to watch a horse he suspected of being lame. Not staring, just noting. And what he noted 3 nights running was that Benjamin Carter went out to the smokehouse after dark, with papers under his arm, and came back without them. On the 4th night, Nathaniel followed him. He didn't confront the man. He waited in the dark until Carter had gone back inside, and then he walked out to the cold smokehouse and raked through the ash with his bare hands. And among the black flakes he found what would not burn a corner of a page, scorched brown, and on it in Carter's own cramped hand, half a line of figures and half a name that was not the name the money had supposedly gone to. He stood in the dark with the burned scrap in his fist, and he thought about his wife saying, "I've a matter to put before you. It won't wait." And he thought about his own mouth saying, "I haven't the time." The next morning he rode to Richmond and hired a man. The man's name was Silas Pike, and he was a former sheriff's deputy who now did quiet work for men with money and trouble, and he had a face like a closed door and a memory like a ledger. "I want 2 things found," Nathaniel told him. "Where the money from my estate has been going these 2 years, and where my wife has gone." Pike wrote nothing down. "The money's easier," he said. "Money leaves tracks. It's got to land somewhere, and somewhere's got a name and a bank. Your wife." He studied Nathaniel with those flat eyes. "A woman who wants to be found leaves a trail. A woman who don't. Which kind is yours?" "The kind who doesn't," Nathaniel said, and was surprised how much it cost him to say it plain. "Then I'll find the money first. The money'll likely lead me to her anyhow if the two are tangled. They generally are." Pike stood. "One thing, Mr. Ashford. You sure you want both these things found? Because sometimes a man hires me to find the truth, and what I find is a truth that sits real close to home. Closer'n he bargained for." He put on his hat. "I've had men pay me to stop once I got close. You the stopping kind." Nathaniel thought of the looping hand in the margin. "Approved. M.A. "No," he said. "Find all of it, whatever it costs, whoever it touches." It touched Margaret within the week. Pike was fast, and Pike was quiet, and Pike came back to Ashford Hall 8 days later with a leather folio, and sat across the study desk from Nathaniel, and laid it out flat, the way Clara herself might have so plain a fool could follow it. "Your clerk's been skimming 2 years, Pike said. "But he's not the head of it. He hasn't the nerve nor the standing. The money moves through a firm in Richmond that don't exist except on paper, and the paper firm banks its takings in an account opened 4 years back before your clerk ever thought of the scheme." He turned a page. "The account's not in his name." "Whose?" Pike looked at him. "You already know who's Mr. Ashford. You've known since the night you started reading. You just hired me so it wouldn't have to be your own hand that wrote it down." Nathaniel said nothing. Outside, a mockingbird ran through every song it had ever stolen. "Margaret Ashford," Pike said. "Your aunt opened that account the same season your wife came into the house, and I'd wager my fee it's no coincidence. A new mistress in the house is a new set of eyes on the books. Your aunt saw it coming. She started building her own store the day your wife walked in the door, and she started poisoning you against that same wife not long after, so that when the day came, and she knew it would, that your wife found the theft, you'd already been taught not to believe a word out of her mouth. It was the cruelest arithmetic Nathaniel had ever had laid before him, and the worst of it was how it balanced. Every column, every entry, 3 years of it, and he'd signed his name to the bottom of it without once reading the page. "My wife found it," Nathaniel said slowly. "She found it in a single night. She came to tell me, and my aunt got to me first and told me she was mad. That's about the shape of it. And I believed my aunt." Pike closed the folio. "You believed the person you'd known your whole life over the person you'd known 3 years. Most men would. Don't make it right, but don't make it a mystery neither." He stood. "Now, you want the second thing?" Nathaniel's head came up. "You found her. I found a woman keeping books for a general store in a river town called Marrow's Field, 60 miles east, under the name Clara Reed. Teaches piano in the evenings. Pays her own way. Owes nobody nothing." Pike put on his hat. "By every account I could gather without tipping my hand, she's the most respected woman in that town inside of 2 months, and not one soul there knows she was ever married to the richest man in Ashford County." Nathaniel was already on his feet. "Where?" "Sit down, Mr. Ashford." The flat voice stopped him. "I'll tell you where she is," Pike said, "because you paid me to. But I'll tell you something else free, because I've got a wife of my own, and I'd want a man to tell me. You go tearing out there tomorrow with your money and your name and your grand apology, and you'll lose her for good. That woman didn't run from a thief. She ran from a man who wouldn't hear her. You show up throwing the same weight around your position, your certainty, your, 'I'll fix it all now that I've decided you were right,' and you'll prove you're the exact same man she left." He opened the door. "You want her back, you don't go get her. You go earn her. And you clean this house first. A man doesn't ask a woman to walk back into a burning building and trust it won't fall on her twice. Natam." Clara had built 2 good months in Marrow's Field when the past came looking, and it did not come the way she'd feared. It came as a letter delivered to Josiah Bell's store, addressed to Mrs. Clara Ashford, in a hand she didn't know. She went white to the lips. Josiah, who missed nothing behind that slow face, set it on the counter between them and put one big hand flat beside it. "That ain't the name I hired," he said quietly. "Nor the name you gave Ms. Pruitt." Clara looked at the letter a long moment. Then she looked up, and she did not lie, because she had promised herself she was done bending the truth to keep herself safe, even the small safe lies. "No," she said, "it isn't." "You in trouble, Ms. Reed?" "I was. A long time before I came here." She lifted her chin. "I keep your books honest, Mr. Bell. I've never taken a cent nor told you a false figure. Whatever name is on that letter, the woman who set your account straight is the same woman standing here, and she's the only one that matters to your store." Josiah Bell studied her a good while. Then he took his hand off the letter and pushed it toward her. "Reckon that's so," he said. "A man's books don't care what a body's called. Neither do I. But—" his slow eyes were kind. "You got somebody hunting you, Ms. Reed, you tell me. I'm a big man, and I keep a bigger dog." Clara's throat closed. It was the plainest kindness anyone had offered her in 3 years, and it came from a shopkeeper who'd known her 2 months, and it undid her far more than any cruelty ever had. "Thank you," she managed. "I'll remember it." She took the letter to the back office and shut the door, and opened it with hands that were steadier than she felt. It was not from Nathaniel. It was from Delia, dictated to a traveling preacher, and written in his careful schoolmaster's hand, and it was short, and every line of it landed like a stone dropped in a still well. "Child." He read the books. "He knows now what you knew. He hired a man, and the man found everything, and the thing at the bottom of it wears a gray dress and answers to Aunt. He has not slept proper in weeks. He does not eat. He asks after you, and I tell him nothing as you charged me. But I am old Clara, and I will not carry a secret to my grave that might be a bridge. So I tell you only this, and leave the choosing where it belongs with you. The papers you left me are still sealed. He has not asked for them honest. But child, he is asking. Every day he is closer to asking honest. Delia." Clara read it 3 times. Then she folded it small and pressed it flat, and sat in the little back office for a long while, not weeping, only breathing. He read the books. She had waited 3 years for a man to read those books. She had begged silently at a closed door for him to hear one true thing out of her mouth. And now, too late, 60 miles and a lifetime away, he was reading. The old Clara, the one who'd put on the blue dress and done her hair, and hoped like a weed against stone that Clara wanted to weep with the sheer relief of being believed. But that Clara had died in a hallway with her hand raised to a door. The woman who sat in Josiah Bell's back office had a different question, and she made herself sit with it until she had it clean. Believing me now that a hired man forced the proof into his hands, is that the same as believing me? Or is it only a man finally trusting the evidence? The way he always trusted evidence? The way he trusted every ledger and lawyer and stranger in the county over the wife in his own house? She did not know, and she was through with pretending she knew things she didn't, and through with hoping in the dark. She took out paper and she wrote back 3 lines, and she chose every word. Delia, I am glad he read the books. Tell him nothing of where I am. If the day comes that he asks you honest for the papers, give them to him, as I said. But hear me, old friend, a man reading a ledger is not the same as a man learning to listen. I left because he could not hear me. Let me know when he has learned how. Not before. See. She sealed it. And she went back out to the counter, and she kept Josiah Bell's books till closing, and that night she taught 3 girls their scales on Ada Pruitt's out-of-tune piano, and she played after the girls had gone, one slow, simple tune with her right hand, only the one her mother had taught her before the instrument was sold, the one she had exactly 1 true note left of. She was steadier than she'd been in years. She was also, though she'd not have admitted it to a living soul listening for a horse on the road, that she'd told herself she never wanted to hear. He didn't come. That was the thing that changed everything, though. Clara had no way to know it as the weeks turned. Nathaniel Ashford knew where his wife was, had known for 2 months, and he did not come. He didn't come because Silas Pike's words had lodged in him, like the burned scrap of paper he still carried in his breast pocket. You don't go get her. You go earn her. And earning for a man who had bought his wife the way he bought land was a foreign country with no map. So he stayed, and he did the hard thing, which was to clean his own house, before he ever thought of asking her back into it. He started with Carter. He did not do it quietly. That surprised even Pike. Nathaniel Ashford, Justice of the County, called Benjamin Carter into the study on a Tuesday morning with the leather folio open on the desk, and the burned scrap laid beside it, and he did not offer the man a chair. 6 years, Nathaniel said. You called me sir 6 years, and every year of it you stole from me, and worse. His voice did not rise, and that was what made Carter go gray. Worse than the stealing. Carter, you helped a woman I trusted convince me my own wife was mad. You sat at my table. You dipped your head and called her Mrs. Ashford. And all the while you were helping bury her. Carter's easy smile was gone. He tried 3 different faces, and none of them fit. Sir, I'm Mrs. Ashford. The accounts are complicated. A man in my position, I only ever did what you were told. By whom? And there it was. The whole thing hung on it. Nathaniel watched the man calculate, watched Benjamin Carter weigh 6 years of loyalty to Margaret Ashford against a rope and find loyalty wanting the way such men always do in the end. Miss Margaret, Carter whispered. It was her scheme from the start, sir. Before she came to me the first month your wife was in the house. Said the new Mrs. Ashford had a dangerous head for figures and would need managing. Said if I helped her I'd be looked after, and if I didn't... He swallowed. She's not a woman you say no to Mr. Ashford. You'd know that better than any man living. Nathaniel stood very still. You'll write that down, he said. Every word, dates, sums, the account in Richmond. You'll write it in your own hand, and you'll sign it, and you'll do it now at this desk while I watch. And then you'll leave my county and never darken it again, and you'll thank God every day of your life that I'm a justice who'd rather see the truth on paper than see you hang. Because I could hang you, Carter. Don't mistake mercy for weakness. I've had my fill of mistaking things, Carter wrote. His hand shook so badly Nathaniel had to make him do the first page twice. And when it was done and signed, and the man had ridden out the gate with everything he could carry, Nathaniel Ashford held in his hand the second true thing that could not be argued away. The first being the books, and this being the confession. And he understood he now had everything he needed to clear his wife's name before the whole county. Everything, except his wife's leave to do it. Chun, that was where the third true thing came in, and it came from the last person he expected. He went to Delia, not as her master. He came into the kitchen where she was kneading bread, and he pulled out a stool and he sat down at her work table like a boy. And Delia, who had watched him grow from a hard, cold child into a hard, cold man, stopped her hands in the dough and looked at him. You want something, she said. You always did have that look since you was small. The look of a boy fixing to ask for a thing he don't deserve. I know what I did, Delia. Do you? She went back to the bread. Say it then, plain, not the lawyer way, the plain way. Nathaniel was quiet a long moment. When he spoke it did not come easy, and that was how she knew it was true. My wife came to me with the truth in her hands, he said, and I was too proud and too busy and too sure of my own house to open a door. And a woman I'd known all my life told me a lie about the woman I married, and I believed the lie because believing it cost me nothing, and hearing my wife would have cost me the trouble of being wrong. He looked at his own hands. I wished aloud that she'd never entered this house. She heard me, and she was right to go. If I'd been her, I'd have gone too. Delia's hands had stopped again in the dough. Well, she said, and her voice was not quite steady. That's more true words than you've said in the whole 35 years I've known you. She left something with you. It wasn't a question. Papers. She'd have left them with you, not the study. She trusted you, and she trusted no one else in this house, and she was right about that too. She did. I'm not asking you to give them to me. Delia turned around fully at that. Flower to the elbows, eyes narrow. I know you charged her you'd only give them over when I asked honest, Nathaniel said. for the truth's own sake, and not to save my estate and not to quiet my conscience. So I'm not asking. I've got the truth already, the books and Carter's confession, all of it. I don't need her papers to clear her name. I can do that tomorrow before the whole county, and I mean to." He stood. "I only came to tell you I finally understand why she left them with you and not with me. It's the same reason she left the ring and took the broken key. She trusted the thing that was true over the thing that was fine. She always did. I just never once was the true thing." He was at the door when Delia spoke. "Nathaniel." He turned. The old woman wiped her hands slow on her apron, and she went to the shelf where the flour tins sat, and from behind them she drew out a packet sealed with candle wax, gone brown with months, and she held it a moment, weighing him. "She said give 'em over when you asked honest," Delia said, "and you just went and told me you wasn't asking, which is about the most honest thing a proud man ever did." She held the packet out. "So I reckon you earned 'em, not by asking, by finally not needing to." Nathaniel Ashford took the sealed papers his wife had left behind, and he did not open them there. He carried them into the study, and he sat down, and he broke the wax alone, and inside, in her small, even hand, was every figure she'd found that last sleepless night, laid out so plain a fool could follow it. Cattle and wages, and the thrice-mended roof, and the looping M.A. in the margin, and clipped to the top a single line she'd written just for whoever finally read it. "I was never mad. I was only never heard. C.W. Not C.A. Not Clara Ashford. C.W. She'd signed it with the name he'd bought her out of. The name she'd taken back the moment she set his ring on the desk. Nathaniel Ashford sat alone in his study, with his wife's proof of her own sanity in his two hands. And the mockingbird went quiet outside, and the great house held its breath around him. And for the first time since he was a boy, for the first time in longer than he could rightly remember, the wealthiest, coldest, most certain man in Ashford County put his face down into his hands and wept, and there was no one there to hear him, and that was exactly what he deserved, and he knew it. When he was done, he wiped his face, and he lit a fresh candle, and he took out paper, and he began to write out the summons to the lawyer, to the preacher, to the neighboring landholders, to every soul whose good opinion had helped bury an innocent woman. He would clear her name, whether she ever took him back or not. That was the part he finally understood. It wasn't a thing he was doing to win her. It was a thing that was true and owed and long past due. And 60 miles east in a river town, a woman who called herself Clara Reed sat down at an out-of-tune piano after her students had gone home and played one note clear and true and let it ring out into the dark until the very last of it faded, and did not yet know that the man who had never once heard her was at that very hour teaching himself at last how to listen. But Margaret Ashford had not built a fortress over 60 years to watch it fall to a stable hand's whisper and a clerk's cowardice, and she moved before Nathaniel did. She moved the way she always had. Not with a knife, with a word. She began it at church, which was where a woman like Margaret did her best work. She sat in the Ashford pew as she had for 40 years, and after the sermon she took the preacher's wife by both hands and let her eyes go wet, and she said low enough to be private and clear enough to carry, "Pray for my nephew. His heart is broken clean in two, and I fear for his mind." The wife you knew there was a wife she robbed him blind and fled in the night, rather than face the shame of it, and now she spreads it about that the theft was ours. Ours, as if grief weren't burden enough. She pressed the woman's hands. "I only tell you so you'll understand when the poor man does something rash. He is not himself. He believes her still. By Wednesday, it was in every kitchen in the county. By Friday, it had a shape the mad Whitmore girl who'd bled the Ashford estate and run, and now from wherever she was hiding, was trying to pin her own crime on the saintly aunt who'd raised the man she'd wronged. And it was good as her lies always were, because it took the true thing and turned it exactly halfway round. Someone had stolen. The books did prove it. A woman had fled in the night. Every fact Margaret handed the county was true. She only reversed the one thing they couldn't check, which way the guilt ran. Nathaniel heard of it Saturday from Amos, who'd heard it at the smithy. "They're saying it in town, Mr. Ashford," Amos said, twisting his hat. About Ms. Clara, saying she's the thief and Miss Margaret's the wronged party, saying you're too broke-hearted to see straight. It ain't my place, sir, but I couldn't let you walk into town not knowing what's waiting there." Nathaniel stood very still in the stable, and the cold thing that had been growing in him since July went colder still, and turned for the first time to something with an edge on it. "She's getting ahead of me," he said. "Sir, my aunt. She knows I've got the books and Carter's gone. She can't stop the truth coming out. So she's poisoning the well before I can pour from it, making it so that when I stand up and say Clara was innocent, the whole county hears it as a broken man defending a mad thief." He turned to Amos. "How long have you known about the mill? The shingles, all of it?" Amos went pale. "Sir, How long?" "Since before your wife ever asked me," Amos whispered. 2 years near. I hauled the same rotted shingles I'd hauled the season before, and I knew the money for new ones went somewhere, and His voice broke. "I got a wife, Mr. Ashford, 4 little ones. A word from you, and we're on the road. I couldn't afford to know what I knew, so I didn't know it. I'm ashamed of it every day, but that's the God's truth of why." And Nathaniel Ashford, who 3 months before would have turned the man out on the spot for holding his tongue, looked at Amos twisting his hat, terrified and honest, and understood something that split him open. "You were afraid of me," Nathaniel said slowly. "You knew the truth, and you swallowed it because you were afraid of what I'd do to you for saying it." "Yes, sir. The same way she must have been afraid." He said it half to himself. "No, not the same. You were afraid for your children. She had no children, no people, no coin of her own. She had only me, and she came to my door anyway with the truth in her hands, knowing what I might do." He shut his eyes. "And I did worse than turn her out. I wished her unborn." Amos said nothing. There was nothing to say. "You won't lose your place, Amos. Not for this, not ever. A man who'll tell me the truth when he's shaking with the fear of it is worth 10 who tell me what I want to hear." Nathaniel opened his eyes, and they were hard again, but the hardness had turned outward now toward the gray-dressed woman in his own house. "Saddle the fast horse. I've been too slow. I thought I had time to do this careful. My aunt just taught me I don't." He rode to Richmond that same day to Silas Pike, and he laid the new trouble out flat. "She's poisoning the county against the truth before I can speak it," Nathaniel said. "How do I get ahead of a rumor?" Pike leaned back. "You don't get ahead of a rumor, Mr. Ashford. Rumor's got no legs to chase and no face to punch. You can't outrun it, and you can't argue it down. A man who stands up denying a thing just teaches folks there was a thing to deny." He tapped the table. "You beat a rumor one way only. You don't answer the whisper with a louder whisper. You answer it with a room full of people who can't look away, and proof they can hold in their own 2 hands, and a witness whose word can't be bought nor bent." He looked at Nathaniel. "You've got the proof. You've got Carter's confession. What you don't have is the one thing that'd shut every mouth in the county for good, which is her." Pike said it plain. Clara, standing in that room, her own self alive and sane and speaking clear. Every soul in the county's been told she's a mad woman hiding in shame. You put her up in front of them calm and clear-eyed, and dressed like the lady she is laying out the same figures you found. He spread his hands. There's not a rumor on earth survives the sight of the woman it's about looking folks in the eye. But he let it hang. You can't make her do it. And by every account I gathered, she's got no earthly reason to. She's got a good life 60 miles from all this. You'd be asking her to walk back into the fire that burned her and stand up in front of the very people who believe the worst of her, all to save the name of the man who put her there. Nathaniel was quiet a long moment. Then I won't ask her to do it for me, he said. I'll ask her to do it for herself, so no one can ever say it again. Whether she comes home to me after or never speaks to me again, her name gets cleared in the open by her own mouth in front of them all. He stood. Where is she, exactly? I've waited long enough. Pike studied him. Then he seemed to decide something. Marrow's Field, he said. Boarding house run by a widow named Pruitt. She keeps the books at Bell's General Store and teaches piano evenings. And Mr. Ashford, he stood too. You remember what I told you? You show up out there with your money and your certainty and your grand plan already made, you'll lose her inside a minute. She didn't leave a thief. She left a man who decided things at her instead of with her. You go do that again on her own doorstep, you'll prove her right forever. I remember. See that you do. Because I've watched you 3 months now, and you've changed some, but a man don't unlearn 35 years of being obeyed in one summer. When you're standing in front of her, the old man's going to want to take charge. Don't let him. He went. 60 miles, and he did not push the horse because for once in his life Nathaniel Ashford was in no hurry to arrive somewhere before he knew what he'd say when he got there. He came into Merrow's Field on a warm evening with the light going long, and he did not go to the boarding house, and he did not go to the store. He stood across the road in the shadow of the smithy, and he waited because Pike had told him one more thing. Watch her first, before she sees you. You've never once in your life watched that woman when she didn't know she was being measured. Do it now. It'll teach you who she's become without you. So he watched. He watched Clara Whitmore come out of Bell's store at closing and lock the door with her own key and hand it back to the big, slow shopkeeper with a word that made the man laugh. He watched 3 girls come running up the road for their music lesson and watched his wife's whole face change for them. Open, warm, easy a face he had seen perhaps twice in 3 years of marriage and never once turned on him. He watched her scold one gently and praise another and set her hand light on a third girl's shoulder to fix her posture at some instrument he couldn't see. He watched her be happy. That was the thing that near broke him where he stood. Not that she'd survived without him. He'd expected that. She was the most capable soul he'd ever known. What he had not expected, what landed in him like a fist, was that she was happier. That the woman who'd gone gray and silent and thin under his roof was 60 miles away and living on a shopkeeper's wages, more alive than he had ever seen her. He had not just failed to make her happy. He had been the thing standing between her and her own happiness the entire time. He stood in the smith's shadow until full dark, and he did not cross the road. And when he finally rode to the edge of town and made a cold camp rather than take a room where she might hear his name, it was not cowardice. It was the first time in his life he had put another person's peace ahead of his own want. She knew he was in town by morning. Of course she did. Merrow's Field was small, and a stranger of Nathaniel Ashford's bearing did not go unremarked, and Ada Pruitt came into breakfast with her eyes bright with news. Tall man rode in last evening, Ada said. Grand horse, grand coat, kept to himself, camped out past the mill like he didn't want a bed in town. Josiah's boy says he stood by the smithy near an hour at closing just watching the street. She buttered her bread. Watching you was the boy's guess, Ms. Reed. You know, a tall grand man who'd cross the county to stand in a shadow and watch you lock a store. Clara's hand did not shake. She'd promised herself that a long time ago, and she kept the promise now, though it cost her. I might, she said. Trouble. I don't know yet. And that was the truth. If a tall man comes asking for Clara Reed Ada, you send him off. If he comes asking for Clara Ashford, she set down her cup. Then he already knows who I am, and there's no point pretending, and you may send him to me. But not before noon. I've Mr. Bell's books to close first, and I'll not let any man on this earth interrupt my honest work again. Not ever again. Ada looked at her a long moment, and whatever she saw made her nod slow. You're a hard woman, Ms. Reed. No, Clara said. I'm a woman who used to be soft and paid dear for it and learned. There's a difference, though. I grant you, it don't always look like one from the outside. He came at noon. He came on foot, hat in his hands. No horse, no grand coat in his shirt sleeves like any man. And he stopped at the gate of Ada Pruitt's boarding house, and he did not come through it. He waited to be received. Clara watched him from the parlor window, do the one thing she had never in 3 years seen him do, wait at a threshold for a woman's leave to enter. She let him wait a good while. Then she went out and stood on the porch a full flight of steps above him, And she did not ask him in, and she did not come down, and the distance between them was exactly what she meant it to be. "Clara," he said, "you found me. I've known where you were 2 months." He turned the hat in his hands. "I didn't come. A man I hired told me if I came the way I do everything with my mind made up and my plan already drawn, I'd lose you inside a minute. So I stayed away, and I did the other thing first. The thing I should have done before I ever wished you gone." "And what thing is that?" "I read the books." His voice was low. "All of them. I found the mill and the cattle and the wages, same as you found them in a single night. I found my aunt's hand in the margin. I hired a man, and he traced the money to an account she opened the same season you came into the house, which means she started robbing me the day she saw you had a head for figures because she knew you'd catch her, and so she started poisoning me against you at the very same time, so that when you did catch her, I wouldn't believe a word." He made himself hold her eyes. "She spent 3 years teaching me not to hear you, and I let her. That's the part no hired man had to find. That part was mine." Clara stood very still on the porch. She had waited 3 years for those words. She had rehearsed in the dark of 100 nights exactly how it would feel to hear a man finally say, "I believe you." And now she heard it, and she waited for the flood of vindication, the warmth, the melting. It didn't come. What came instead was a strange, clear coldness, and out of it, she said the thing she had not planned to say, the thing that came up from the truest bottom of her. "You didn't lose me the day I left Nathaniel." He went still. "You think you did. You think the wound is that I walked out in the night. It isn't." She came down one step, just one, so she could see his face full. "You lost me the night you stopped believing me. And that was long before I ever heard you through that door. You'd stopped believing me weeks before, months before. The door was just the night I finally heard that you had. I didn't leave because of what you said. I left because of what you're saying. It told me that somewhere along the way, you'd decided my word was worth less than your aunt's, and you'd decided it so deep and so long ago that you could say you wished me unborn in the same flat voice you'd used to say, the crop needed rain. Clara, you believe me now." She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. That was what made it terrible. "And I'm glad of it. I am. But hear yourself, Nathaniel. You believe me now because you read a ledger, because a hired man put proof in your 2 hands. You believe the evidence. You always did believe the evidence, every stranger, every lawyer, every book over the wife in your own house. So tell me plain, because I've earned plain." She held his eyes. "Is this you finally learning to hear me, or is this just you once again trusting a document over a woman? Only this time the document happens to say I was right." And Nathaniel Ashford, who had come with words prepared, found every one of them turned to ash in his mouth because she had cut clean to the one thing he had not let himself look at. He didn't have an answer, and to his own vast surprise he didn't reach for one. "I don't know," he said. It was perhaps the first fully honest thing he had said to her in the whole of their marriage. "I don't know, Clara. I've been asking myself that same question the whole ride out, and I won't stand here and hand you a pretty answer I'm not sure of, because a pretty answer is what got us here." He gripped the hat till his knuckles went white. "Maybe it's both. Maybe I only started believing you because the ledger forced me to. I can't swear it isn't. But I know this much somewhere in the reading of it, it stopped being about the money. It stopped being she was right about the theft and became she stood in my house with the truth in her hands, and I looked at her like she was a burden. And that second thing, that one didn't come from any ledger. There's no column for it. That one I found on my own in the dark, and it's the thing that's kept me from sleeping, and it is the reason I stood in a shadow last evening and watched you laugh with those children, and did not cross the road because I finally understood I had no right to your happiness. I forfeited that. I only came to what?" He drew a breath. "My aunt is spreading it through the county that you're the thief," he said. "That you robbed me and fled, and now you're blaming her from hiding. It's in every kitchen in Ashford County by now, and I can clear your name. I have the books I have. Carter's signed confession. I have enough to stand up before the whole county and prove the theft was hers. I mean to do it whether you'll see me again or not. But the man I hired told me the truth, and I'll pass it to you, plain proof and confessions, clear a name on paper. They don't kill a rumor. The only thing that kills a rumor like the one she's built is the woman it's about standing in the open, alive and clear-eyed, telling it straight to their faces. He looked up at her. I'm not here to ask you to come back to me. I've no right to ask that, and I know it. I'm here to ask if you'll come clear your own name, in front of them all, so no one can ever say it again, not to you, not to your children, if you ever have them. Not over your grave, not for me, for you.
Chapter 30.
Clara turned and went into the house and shut the door and left him standing at the gate. She did not come back out for an hour. Inside, she sat in the little back room with the piano key on the sill, and she did not weep, and she did not pace. And she did what she had trained herself to do in 3 hard years. She laid the thing out plain, so plain a fool could follow it the way her father taught her. On the one side, a good life, hard won and her own. A town that knew her as honest. Work she was proud of. A door that had opened to her on nothing but her word. Peace. If she stayed, if she sent him off, she kept all of it clean. On the other side, her name still. 60 miles west, in the county where her mother was buried in the church where she'd been married, her name was being dragged through every kitchen as a mad thief. And it would follow her. Marrow's field was small, and the world was smaller. A name like that had legs, and one day it would walk into this town too and find her. And under both of those, the thing that was harder to lay out because it had no column. The man at the gate had said, I don't know when he could have lied. Had watched her be happy and not cross the road. Had come with his hat in his hands and waited to be received. None of it undid what he'd done. None of it earned him a single thing. But it was not nothing, and she was too honest to pretend it was nothing, even now, even to herself. When she came back out, he was still there. He had not sat. He had not leaned on the gate. He had stood the whole hour in the sun hat, in hands waiting, and something in the plain, stubborn patience of a man who had never waited for anyone reached her when his words had not. I'll do it, she said from the porch. But you'll hear my terms, and you'll agree to everyone before I set foot in that county, or I don't come at all. Name them. I clear my own name. I speak. Not you standing up to defend your poor wronged wife. I'll not be defended by any man ever again. I'll be heard. I lay out the figures myself in my own words, and you sit down and let me. Can you do that? Can you sit in your own great hall and stay in your chair while a woman does the talking? It cost him. She watched it cost him. Yes. Second, whatever happens after, whether your county believes me or calls me a liar to my face, you don't touch me and you don't ask me home. Clearing my name and coming back to you are 2 different roads. Nathaniel and I'll walk the first with you, but I'll not have you assume it leads to the second. It may not. I don't know that it does. Agreed. Both. Whatever you. Third. And here her voice changed. Dropped, went to the very bottom. Your aunt raised you. She's the only mother you rightly remember. When I stand up in that hall and lay it out plain, I am going to destroy her in front of everyone she's known for 60 years. Not with lies, with the truth, which is worse because there's no coming back from it. So before I agree, I have to know you understand what you're asking. You're asking me to burn down the woman who raised you. If any part of you is going to flinch when it's done, if any part of you is going to look at me across that ruin and think she's the one who did this, then tell me now, and I'll stay here and keep my peace and let your county think what it likes. Nathaniel Ashford was quiet a long moment, and then he said, the thing that more than any apology, more than I believe you told her the man had truly changed. She didn't raise me to be a man who lets an innocent woman hang for her crimes, he said. If she'd raised me right, I'd have believed my wife the first night. Whatever she was to me, once she stopped being it, the day I understood she built her whole scheme around making sure I'd never hear you. I'm not asking you to burn down my mother, Clara. I'm asking you to help me stop protecting a thief. And if it costs me the last person I've got left in the world besides you. He looked at her steady. Then I'll have earned that cost. Same as I earned every other. Clara looked down at him a long, long moment from the top of the steps. All right. she said quietly. Then I'll come. Not as your wife, as the witness to my own life. She came down the steps at last past him, out the gate, and turned back only once. And Nathaniel, there's one thing your hired man didn't have to tell you, that I'll tell you free, so you're not surprised by it when we get there. Your aunt won't sit still and let it happen. A woman who spent 3 years and a fortune making sure I'd never be heard is not going to fold her hands and watch me speak. She'll have one more card. Women like her always keep one more card. So whatever you think is going to happen in that hall, she held his eyes. It won't. She'll see to that. Come. We've 60 miles to ride, and I want to be there before she hears I'm coming. She was right about the card. Margaret heard they were coming before they were halfway there. It was Amos who carried the warning, riding out to meet them on the county road, with his horse blown and his face grim. He'd left the moment he understood what was happening, and he'd near killed the animal getting to them. She knows Mr. Ashford. He got the words out between breaths. Somebody in town saw you ride off east and put it together. Miss Margaret's been in the study since yesterday with the door shut, sent riders out 3 directions, and this morning... He looked at Clara, and there was fear in it, real fear on Clara's behalf. This morning the sheriff came out to the hall, ma'am, Miss Margaret's own doing. She swore out a warrant, for you, theft and abandonment. Says when you show your face in the county, you're to be taken up and held. Clara did not so much as blink. Of course she did. Ma'am, you don't understand. If you ride in, they'll arrest you. She's made it so you can't stand up and speak at all. She's made it so the first thing that happens when Ashford County lays eyes on you is a pair of irons. Amos turned to Nathaniel, desperate. She's beat you to it, sir. Whatever grand hearing you meant to hold, she's turned it into a hanging. And Nathaniel Ashford felt the old rage rise in him, hot and useless. The rage of a man accustomed to power, discovering someone had used it against him first. He wanted to spur the horse and ride in and tear the warrant up with his own hands. He didn't. He looked at his wife. You told me she'd have one more card, he said. I did. You knew it'd be something like this. I knew it'd be something. Clara's voice was steady, almost calm, and it steadied him to hear it. She can't fight the truth, Nathaniel. She's known that since the day you read the books. So she doesn't fight the truth, she fights the hearing of it. That's all she's ever done. 3 years ago she made it so you wouldn't hear me. Now she's made it so the county can't. A warrant's a gag. If they arrest me the moment I arrive, I never get to speak, and the only story left standing is hers. She turned the mare's head. So we don't arrive the way she's expecting, and we don't let the sheriff take me before I've said one word. Amos, who swore the warrant. On whose word? Miss Margaret's, ma'am, and... Amos swallowed. And Mr. Carter's. Both Clara and Nathaniel went still. Carter's gone, Nathaniel said. I ran him out of the county myself. He signed a confession. He came back, sir. Amos's hands were white on the reins. 3 days passed. Miss Margaret sent for him, and he came back, and he's staying at the hall as her guest, bold as Sunday. And the word in town is, he's unswore his confession. Says you beat it out of him. Says you forced him to sign lies to cover your mad wife, and now he's come forward brave and honest to set it right. The rage went out of Nathaniel all at once, and what was left in its place was colder and far more dangerous. She bought him back, he said. Bought him or scared him worse than you did, Clara said. It doesn't matter which. It's the same move she's turned your one witness into her one witness. Your confession's worthless now. It's your word against his that it was ever true, and the whole county already believes her, so they'll believe him. She's very good, Nathaniel. I told you she was good. She's taken every piece of proof you had and turned the edge of it back on you. She sat her horse and thought fast, and he watched her think, and it struck him even now, even here, that he was watching the sharpest mind in the county work a problem he could not solve. The same mind he'd once let his aunt call madness. The books are still true, Clara said finally. Carter can unswear his mouth. He can't unswear the numbers. The account in Richmond's still in your aunt's name. That's a fact in a bank ledger, and no amount of Carter's crying changes whose name is on it. What did your hired man get exactly? Not what Carter said. What can be proved without any man's testimony at all. Nathaniel understood what she was reaching for. The Richmond account. Pike has the bank's own record. It was opened in her name, her signature the same season you came. And the paper firm that billed for the repairs, it banks into that same account. That's not testimony. That's the bank's books against hers. Then that's what we stand on. Clara's jaw set. Not Carter. Not your confession. The bank. A thing she can't buy back and can't unswear and can't call mad because a bank ledger doesn't have a mind to lose. She turned to Amos. Where's the hired man now, Pike? Richmond, far as I know, ma'am. Then here's what we do, and we do it fast before she knows we know about the warrant. Clara laid it out quick and clean, and both men listened, and neither one interrupted, and Nathaniel Ashford sat his horse on the county road and took orders from his wife, and found that it did not gall him at all. It felt, in fact, like the first sane thing that had happened in 3 years. They did not ride to the hall. They rode to Richmond first, and they were 3 days about it. And in those 3 days, Margaret Ashford sat in her nephew's house and waited for a runaway to blunder into a trap, and grew day by day more certain and more still and more sure that she had won. She had reason to be sure. She'd done everything right. The warrant was sworn. Carter was housed and coached and grateful. The county was hers kitchen by kitchen. When the mad Whitmore girl finally showed her face, and she would, Margaret was sure because Nathaniel would drag her back in his foolish, besotted certainty, she'd be taken up in irons before she opened her mouth, and that would be the end of it. A woman in chains has no voice. Everyone knows that. Margaret had built her whole life on it. What she did not know was that Clara and Nathaniel were in Richmond, sitting across a table from Silas Pike, and that Pike had done in 3 days the thing that turned the whole board over. You want the bank's own man to say it, Pike said when they'd laid it out. Not a paper, not a copy your aunt can call forged. The actual clerk who opened the actual account, standing in the actual room, pointing at the actual signature. That's the one thing she can't touch because he's got no stake and no fear of her. She's nothing to a Richmond bank clerk, but a name in a book. He leaned back. It'll cost. Clerks don't like to travel, and they like to testify less. Pay it, Nathaniel said. Whatever it is. Already did, Pike said. Figured you'd say so. And he almost smiled. There's more. You wanted the theft. That's the theft, clean and provable. But while I was digging the account, I found something you didn't hire me to find, and I sat on it because I wasn't sure you'd want it. He drew out a folded paper and set it on the table, and he looked for the first time since Nathaniel had known him uneasy. Your aunt didn't just steal Mr. Ashford. 4 years back, the same season she opened that account, there was another matter. A codicil to your late father's will. It surfaced, and then it disappeared. I found the lawyer who drew it. He's old now and frightened, and he wouldn't say much. But he said this: the codicil left a portion of the estate, a real portion, to a person outside the family, and your aunt made it go away. Nathaniel's voice was very quiet. What person? Pike looked at him. He wouldn't say the name. Said he'd sworn an oath, and he'd sworn it to a dead man, and he'd take it to his own grave. But he said one thing more, and then he'd say no further. Pike unfolded the paper. It was blank on one side. On the other, in a shaking old hand, 3 words. He wrote this and told me to give it to whoever came asking honest. Said the one it names would understand. He turned it over. Ask about Delia.
Chata.
Clara felt the world tilt. Nathaniel had gone white. Delia's been in this house 40 years. She my father. He couldn't finish it. You don't know that it means what you think, Clara said quickly, though her own heart was pounding. It could be anything, a bequest to an old servant. Your father might have wanted to see her cared for in her age. That would be like a decent man, and by every account your father was a decent man. Then why would Margaret make it disappear? Nathaniel's voice cracked. Why swear a lawyer to silence and bury a codicil, unless what it said was something she couldn't afford the county to know? Unless Delia was. Unless my father. He put his hand over his mouth. And Clara, who had spent 3 years learning that the truth was almost never as clean as the lie, said the thing that needed saying. "Nathaniel, look at me. We do not know what that codicil said, and we are not going to guess, and we are not going to burst into that kitchen and break a good old woman's heart on a lawyer's frightened riddle. Do you hear me? I have had my whole self broken on a thing somebody was too sure of. I will not do it to Delia." She held his eyes till he steadied. "Here is what we know. Your aunt stole. That we can prove with the bank's own man, and that is what clears my name and stops the warrant. This," she touched the paper, "this we set aside. We'll learn the truth of it gently from Delia herself when the storm's past, and she can choose whether to tell it, not before. The truth is owed to her first, before it's owed to you or the county or anyone. That's the whole lesson of the last 3 years, isn't it? A person deserves to be the first to speak their own truth, not the last to hear it told about them." Nathaniel looked at her a long moment, and something broke open in his face. Not grief now, but a kind of awe. "You're a better person than I'll ever be," he said. "No," Clara said. "I just know what it costs to be talked about instead of heard. I paid it. I'm not going to spend it on someone else." She stood. "Fold that paper up and put it away. We have a warrant to break and a name to clear, and I did not ride 60 miles to unravel over a riddle. Delia can wait. She's waited 40 years. She can wait 1 more week to be asked kindly. Mr. Pike, your bank clerk. Can he be at Ashford Hall in 2 days? He can. Then so can we. And Nathaniel," she turned at the door, "when we walk into that hall, your aunt is going to have that warrant ready to spring the moment she sees me. So we don't let her spring it. We bring the sheriff in on the truth before she can use him. Amos, ride ahead. Find the sheriff. Not at the hall, catch him alone in town before Margaret's got her hooks in him for the day. Tell him the justice of the county is coming home with the bank's own man from Richmond, and that before he serves any warrant on any woman, he'd best hear what a Richmond bank clerk has to say about whose name is on the stolen money. A sheriff's a careful man. He won't want to iron an innocent woman in front of the county and answer for it after. Give him a reason to wait, and he'll wait."
Ye superior.
They came into Ashford County on a bright hot morning, and they did not sneak, and they did not hide, and that was Clara's doing too. "Let her see us come," she'd said. "Let her think her trap is springing. A trap only works on someone who doesn't know it's there." Word ran ahead of them like fire in dry grass. By the time they reached the hall, the drive was full, neighbors, tenants, the curious and the cruel, the whole county come to see the mad Whitmore girl dragged back in chains because Margaret's story had done its work, and everyone knew how this ended. They lined the drive and they murmured, and Clara rode straight up through the middle of them with her back straight and her chin level, and she did not look mad, and she did not look ashamed, and she did not look like a woman being dragged anywhere. She looked like a lady coming home. And the murmur changed just slightly because a story and the sight of a person do not always agree, and Pike had told her they wouldn't. Margaret was waiting on the steps. The sheriff stood beside her. And beside him, pale and smiling, his nervous salesman's smile, stood Benjamin Carter. "Sheriff," Margaret said, clear and carrying the moment Clara was in earshot. "There is the woman named in the warrant, Clara Whitmore, who robbed this estate and fled her lawful husband. Do your duty." The sheriff took 1 step forward, and Nathaniel Ashford swung down off his horse and put himself between the sheriff and his wife, and said in the justice's voice, the voice the whole county had obeyed for 15 years, "Sheriff Coyle, before you serve that warrant, you'll hear one man speak. He's come from Richmond at my expense. He's got no stake in this family, and he's carrying the record of a bank. You serve that warrant before he speaks, and whatever he says after, you'll have ironed an innocent woman in front of the whole county on the word of," he looked at Margaret, "an interested party. And you'll answer for it. To me, and to the circuit judge, who is a friend of mine, and who will ask you why you didn't take 5 minutes to hear a bank's own clerk before you put chains on a lady." He let it land. 5 minutes, Coyle. That's all I'm asking. Then serve your warrant if you still think it's righteous." Sheriff Coyle was a careful man, exactly as Clara had judged. He looked at Margaret. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the tall stranger from Richmond who dismounted behind Nathaniel with a leather case under his arm. And he did the thing a careful man does when powerful people disagree in front of a crowd. He stalled. 5 minutes, Coyle said. Inside. I'll hear the man. Then we'll see. Margaret's composure did not crack. But Clara, watching her, saw the thing she'd been waiting to see. Saw the old woman recalculate, saw her understand that the trap had a flaw in it, and saw her reach smooth as ever for the next card. By all means, Margaret said, let the poor girl have her Richmond man. But I'd remind you, Sheriff, a bank clerk can be paid to say a great deal. My nephew is a rich man, and a besotted one, and there's no lie money won't buy. Mr. Carter can tell you that himself. He knows what my nephew's money bought him. And Carter, on cue, stepped forward with his nervous smile. It's true, Sheriff. He forced me to sign a false confession. Beat it out of me. I'm here to set it. Sit down, Mr. Carter, Clara said. She had not raised her voice. She never raised her voice. And that was why the whole drive went quiet. She dismounted, and she walked up the steps past the sheriff, past Margaret, and she turned at the top to face the crowd. And for the first time in 3 years, the county of Ashford looked at Clara Whitmore and had to actually see her. You've all been told the story about me, she said, and her voice carried clean and level to the back of the crowd. You've been told I'm mad and a thief and a woman who ran from her husband to hide her crimes. You've been told it so many times in so many kitchens that you've stopped hearing it as a story and started hearing it as a fact. I know how that happens. It happened to my husband first in this very house, and it cost us 3 years. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you a different story. I'm done telling. I've been telling for 3 years, and it never once worked. She looked out over them. I'm going to show you. Come inside, all of you who'll fit, and bring the sheriff, and bring Mr. Carter, and bring my husband's aunt, and let's none of us leave until every soul here has seen the same thing with their own eyes and can judge it for themselves. Because I'll not be believed today. I'm past caring to be believed. I'll be proved, or I'll ride back east and you can keep your story. But you'll not put irons on me in the dark. Whatever you do to me, you'll do it in the light after you've seen. Run on till you may meet. And she turned and walked into the great hall of Ashford. And after a stunned moment, the county followed her because there is nothing on this earth a crowd will not follow, through a door held open by someone who is not afraid. The hall filled. The lawyer came, and the preacher and the neighboring landholders and the tenants crowded at the back, and Margaret took her place near the great cold hearth with Carter at her elbow, and the sheriff stood by the door with his thumbs in his belt, and Clara stood at the long table where 3 years of Ashford accounts had been laid out, and Nathaniel Ashford sat down. He sat down. That was the thing half the county would remember longest, that the justice, the master of the house, the man whose word had ruled the county 15 years, pulled out a chair at his own table and sat down and folded his hands and let a woman stand and do the talking. He had promised her he would. She had asked him, could he stay in his chair while a woman spoke, and he had said yes, and now he did it, and it cost him, and she saw that it cost him, and she loved him for it. In a small, hard place she'd thought was closed for good, not enough yet, not near enough, but a little, despite herself. My name, Clara began, is Clara Whitmore. I keep books. I've kept them since I was a girl at my father's knee, and I kept this estate's books for 3 years, and I never once in my life put down a false figure, because a false figure is a lie that outlives you, and I was raised better. She opened the first ledger. Now, I'm not going to ask you to take my word. My word's been called mad, so we'll leave my word out of it entirely, and we'll use only things that can't lie. And she laid it out. Plain. So plain a fool could follow it. The cattle bought and half never fed. The wages paid to men who'd never drawn breath on the land, and she named them and asked the crowd, does any soul here know a laborer by these names? No, nor does the county, because they never lived. The mill roof mended thrice, still leaking. And here Amos stepped forward, terrified, honest, and said in front of the whole county that he'd hauled the same rotted shingles twice, and the money for new ones had gone, he knew not where, and that he'd been afraid to say it, and he was done being afraid. The crowd began to shift, to murmur. The story they'd carried in was cracking against the thing in front of their eyes. But cattle and wages and shingles, Clara went on, those could be a clerk's mistake if you wanted to be kind about it. Mr. Carter's mistake, maybe. And Mr. Carter's told you my husband forced his confession, and maybe some of you believe that, and I can't prove what happened in a room I wasn't in. She turned. So we'll leave Mr. Carter out of it too. We'll leave out every man's word, mine and his both, and we'll ask the one witness in this room who cannot be paid and cannot be beaten and cannot lose his mind because he hasn't got a stake in any of us. She looked to the door. The account that all this stolen money flowed into was opened at a bank in Richmond 4 years ago. This gentleman opened it. Sir, will you tell the county in your own words whose name is on that account? The Richmond clerk stepped forward, dry and precise and utterly indifferent to every person in the room, which was exactly what made him unanswerable. He opened his leather case. He read out the date and the account number, and the deposits that matched to the dollar the Phantom repairs to the mill. And then he read the name on the signature card. The account, said the clerk in the bored voice of a man who did this every day, was opened by and remains in the sole name of Miss Margaret Ashford. The hall did not erupt. It went silent. That was worse. Margaret Ashford stood by the cold hearth, and every eye in the county turned to her, and for one long moment the fortress held. Then she reached for the last card, and it was the oldest one, the one that had worked for 60 years. That account, she said, cool as spring water, was opened by me for the estate at my late brother's own instruction to hold funds for improvements. If money was stolen from it, then the thief is the person who managed it day to day, which was never me. I am an old woman. I signed where I was told. Mr. Carter kept that account. Ask him. She turned smooth to Carter. Tell them, Benjamin. Tell them who moved the money. And there it was. Clara saw. It saw the whole thing hinge on this one instant. Margaret had just done to Carter exactly what she'd done to Clara 3 years ago. Hung the crime around the neck of the person beside her. Made the loyal helper the scapegoat. It was the same move. It was always the same move. But Benjamin Carter had been the one holding the pen for 6 years. And Benjamin Carter had just heard a Richmond bank clerk say Margaret's name and only Margaret's name in front of the whole county. And Benjamin Carter, who was a coward, understood in that instant that the fortress was going to fall and that Margaret Ashford intended for him to be standing under it when it did. No, Carter said. Margaret turned to him slowly. Benjamin, no? His voice rose, cracked, tumbled out of him. No, I won't. You said the account was yours. You said I'd never be tied to it. You said if I ever know. She's lying. It was her scheme, all of it, from the first month the new Mrs. Ashford came into this house. She came to me and said the girl had too sharp an eye and would need managing, and she'd look after me if I helped and ruin me if I didn't. He was shaking now, the whole nervous, smiling ruin of him coming apart in front of the county. The confession I signed for Mr. Ashford was true. Every word. She paid me to come back and unswear it. She paid me to call it a lie. But it wasn't a lie. God help me. It was the only true thing I've done in 6 years. He's hysterical, Margaret said. He's been bought. The account's in your name. Carter screamed it. It's in your name, Margaret. The man just read it out. Whose name did he read? Did he read mine? He read yours. And the fortress fell, not with a crash. With a silence, as 60 years of the county's trust in Margaret Ashford drained out of the room all at once, kitchen by kitchen, face by face, and left her standing alone by the cold hearth with the truth read out in a bank clerk's bored voice, and her own bought witness weeping her guilt to the rafters. Nathaniel Ashford rose from his chair. He had kept his promise. He had sat while his wife spoke and let her prove it every word in her own voice, and he had not lifted a hand nor said a syllable in her defense, because she had not needed defending. She had needed only to be heard, and he had finally, at long last, given her the one thing he'd denied her for 3 years, a room that had to listen. Now he stood, and he turned to the county, and he did the thing that no one, least of all Margaret, had thought the proud man capable of. He did not clear his wife. His wife had cleared herself. He confessed. "You've heard it," he said. "You've seen it proved. There's nothing I can add to the truth this woman just laid before you. She's done it better than I could because she's the one who found it alone in a single night 3 years ago." He looked out at them, at the whole county that had bowed to him for 15 years, and his voice did not shake, but something in it had broken and been rebuilt into a harder, truer thing. "But I'll tell you what the ledgers can't. My wife brought me this truth 3 years ago. She came to my study door with it in her hands. And before she could knock, my aunt got to me first with a lie that Clara was mad, that she'd invented it all, that the Whitmore blood was bad, and I—" He made himself say it in front of them all. "I believed the lie. I didn't even open the door. I told my aunt I hadn't the time. And Clara heard me through that door wish aloud that she'd never entered this house." The hall was so still Clara could hear her own heart. "I believed a lie," Nathaniel Ashford said, "before I believed my own wife. I trusted a bank and a lawyer and my own aunt, and every stranger in this county over the one person in this house who never once told me anything but the truth. That's not her shame you've been carrying in your kitchens these 3 months. It's mine. I'm the fool of this story, not her. Me." He turned to the sheriff. "There's your thief Coyle, and there's the man she bought to lie for her. And here—" He laid Carter's original signed confession and Pike's folio and the Richmond ledger on the table, "is enough to hang the both of them, if you're of a mind. Though I'd sooner see them gone than dead. The only warrant that ought to be served in this county today is one for Margaret Ashford. And if you want a second name for it—" His voice did not waver. "You can add mine, for being the man whose willful blindness let her do it." Sheriff Coyle looked at the table. He looked at the weeping clerk and the white-faced aunt and the bankman packing up his indifferent case. And then he crossed the hall slow, and he took Margaret Ashford by the arm gently, the way you take hold of something that used to be powerful, and he said, "Miss Margaret, I think you'll come with me." She did not weep. She did not rage. She looked at Clara across the whole length of the hall, and Clara looked back, and something passed between the two women that no one else could read: the old queen and the girl she'd tried to bury, and the girl still standing. "You should have stayed gone," Margaret said quietly. "I know," said Clara, "but my name couldn't, so I came back for it." She held the old woman's eyes without triumph and without pity, only the plain level truth that had been her whole armor for 3 years. "You spent everything you had, ma'am, making sure no one would ever hear me. And in the end, the only thing that undid you was the one thing you couldn't buy or frighten or call mad. A room full of people, and the truth said plain out loud." She stepped back. "That's all it ever was. That's all I ever wanted. To be heard once in the light before you all." And they had heard her. The whole county packed into the great hall of Ashford had heard Clara Whitmore, and there was not a soul among them now who could ever again say in any kitchen that she was mad or a thief or anything at all. But the woman who'd stood at a long table with her father's steady hands and proved without once raising her voice that she had been telling the truth the entire time. The sheriff led Margaret out and Carter after her, and the county drew back to let them pass, and no one tipped a hat, and no one said a word, and that silence was the loudest verdict of all. The county emptied out of the great hall slower than it had come in, and quieter, because a crowd that arrives to see a hanging and stays to watch itself, proved wrong, does not leave with anything to say. They filed past Clara at the long table, and one by one they did the thing that cost them. They met her eyes. A few muttered something that was almost sorry. Most just looked and nodded and went, and that was enough because she had never wanted their apology. She'd wanted only what she'd gotten, which was to stand in the light and be seen true. When the last of them was gone and the hall stood empty, but for the two of them and the scattered papers, Nathaniel Ashford did not come to her. That was the first thing she noticed, and the thing that told her the most. The old Nathaniel would have crossed the room the instant the crowd cleared, certain of his welcome, certain the proving had earned him something. This man stayed where he was by his chair, hat in his hands again, though he was in his own house, and he waited the way he'd waited at Ada Pruitt's gate for her to decide the distance between them. "You kept your word," Clara said finally. "You sat down, you let me speak. It was the hardest thing I ever did." He said it plain. "And the only thing I've done right in 3 years. I'd have sat there till the roof fell in before I'd have taken it from you." She gathered the papers, slowly squaring the edges, giving her hands something to do, while the thing in her chest settled. "Your aunt will go to trial." "She will." "And you meant it on the steps, about adding your own name." "I meant it." He turned the hat. "I still mean it. What I let happen in this house, there's no court that'll try me for it, but there ought to be. I've thought a great deal these 3 months about what I owe. To you. To Amos, who was afraid of me and had cause. To Delia." His voice caught on the last name, and Clara understood why, and her heart went tight because the folded paper from Richmond was still in his coat, and neither of them had spoken of it since. "We'll come to Delia," Clara said gently. "Gently, as I said. Not today. No, not today." He drew a breath. "Clara, I'm not going to ask you to stay. I told you at the gate I'd no right to, and standing here in the wreck of what I let this house become, I've less right than ever. You've cleared your name. That was the whole of the bargain, and I'll hold to every part of it. There's a wagon and a driver at your service whenever you'd like to go back east, and money your own free and clear put in your name, not mine. I've seen to it, so you'll never again have to take a shopkeeper's charity to keep body and soul together. God bless that shopkeeper for giving it when I never did." He set the hat down on the table at last, slow like laying down a weight. "You can go home to Marrow's Field, and I'll not follow. You've my word, and I know at last what my word's worth to you, which is not much, but it's the truest thing I've got, and I'm giving it to you clean." Clara stood very still with the squared papers in her hands. She had planned for this moment on the whole 60-mile ride. She'd told herself she'd take the wagon, that clearing her name was one road and coming home was another, and she'd walk the first and turn her back on the second, because a woman who goes back to the man who broke her teaches him he can break her again. She'd been so sure. She'd rehearsed the leaving the way she'd once rehearsed the staying. And now the moment was here, and the man was not asking her to stay, was in fact holding the door open for her to go, was doing the one thing that made staying possible, which was making it entirely her own free choice, with nothing owed and nothing leveraged, and no ring to trap her. And she found that all her rehearsed leaving had gone to dust in her mouth, same as his rehearsed apologies had at the gate. But she was not the woman who put on the blue dress and hoped like a weed against stone. That woman had died in a hallway. She would not be resurrected by a good speech, however true. "No," Clara said. Nathaniel went still. "Not yet," she said. "You're doing it again, Nathaniel, deciding for me. You've decided I want to go home, and you've built me a whole road east and packed me onto it all so I'll never have to owe anybody anything. And it's kind. It's the kindest thing you've ever done. But it's still you arranging my life the way you think it ought to go and then presenting it to me finished. 3 years ago, you decided I was mad without asking me. Now you've decided I'm leaving without asking me. It's a gentler mistake. It's still the same mistake." He stared at her. And then slowly he sat back down in the chair, not because she'd told him to, but because his legs seemed to have gone out from under him. "I don't know how to do it any other way," he said, and there was something naked in it, something she'd never once heard from him. "I've given orders my whole life. I don't know how to—" "Clara, tell me, plain. What does it look like a man not deciding for you because I want to do it and I don't know how and I'm too old to pretend I do?" And that helplessness, that willingness to say, "I don't know how," out loud in his own hall to the wife he'd wronged, reached her in the place the words never had. "It looks like this," she said. "You ask, and then you wait. And whatever I answer, you don't argue it into the shape you wanted. You just hear it." She set the papers down. "So ask me. Ask me plain and then be quiet and let me answer for myself." He looked at her a long moment. Then he said it, and his voice was not the justice's voice, and it was not the cold master's voice, and it was not any voice she'd heard from him in 3 years of marriage. It was just a man's. "Clara, will you stay?" And then he did the hardest part, the part she'd told him to do. He went quiet. He folded his hands, and he waited and did not fill the silence, and did not sweeten the ask, and did not lean on it. He just waited to hear what she would freely say. She let the silence run. She made him sit in it not to be cruel, but because she needed to know he could, that the man who'd once said, "I haven't the time," could now give her all the time in the world and not flinch. He could. He sat and he waited, and he did not break. "I don't know," Clara said at last. "That's my honest answer, and you'll take it honest because you promised me you would. I don't know if I can stay, but I know I'm not ready to go, and that's further than I ever thought I'd come standing in this hall again." She picked up the papers. "So here's what I'll do. I'll stay a while. Not as your wife, the ring's on the desk still, or wherever it went, and it stays there till I say different, if I ever do. I'll stay as a woman deciding. You'll have no claim on me, and I'll make you no promises. I'll keep to the East Wing, and I'll manage this estate's books because Lord knows they need it, and there's no one else in this county I'd trust to do it right." A ghost of something crossed her face. "And you'll pay me for it. A fair wage in my own name, same as you'd pay any steward. I'll not lift a pen for you again as a wife who's owed nothing and expected to be grateful for the roof. I'll do it as a woman who's worth the money, and you'll hand it to me every quarter, and that's the price of my staying at all." Nathaniel Ashford, who had once bought her, now looked at the woman telling him he'd have to pay her honest wages to keep her under his roof, and something moved across his face that was almost impossibly a smile. "Done," he said. "Best bargain I ever made, and the first one I ever made with you where you named the terms, and I just said yes." "Get used to it," Clara said. "If I stay at all, it'll be the shape of every day. You ask, I answer, you hear me. That's the whole of it. It's not romance, Nathaniel. It's plainer than that and harder than that. It's just two people who both agree that one of them's word is worth as much as the other's. Most marriages never manage it. I don't know if we can. But I'll not settle for less, not ever again, not from you, not from any man breathing. I don't want you to settle for less." "Then we'll see," she said. "We'll just see." Shaun. Delia was in the kitchen because Delia was always in the kitchen, and she had heard the whole thing. The county coming and the county going. The truth read out, the aunt led away in the sheriff's careful grip. She'd heard it from the doorway, and then retreated to her bread, because a woman who's served 40 years knows when a thing is not hers to stand and watch. Clara went to her that evening, alone. She'd told Nathaniel to stay away, and he had, and that too was new. "Delia." The old woman turned from the stove, and her eyes were wet, and she opened her arms without a word, and Clara walked into them and let herself be held. And for the first time since the night she'd set the ring down, Clara Whitmore wept. Not much. Not long. But she wept, and Delia held her, and rocked her a little, the way you rock a child, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the holding didn't say better. "You come back," Delia finally murmured. "I prayed you never would for your own sake, and I prayed every day you would for mine. God sorted it out better'n I could." "I haven't come back," Clara said into her shoulder. "Not the way you mean. I've come to decide. There's a difference. There's a difference to you," Delia said, wise as ever. "To an old woman who's watched you both, it looks like the same thing wearing a careful coat. But I'll not argue it. You take all the deciding you need, child. You earned the right to it in blood." She held Clara back at arm's length, studying her. "Now, you've a look. Something else. Out with it, you never could hide a thing from me." And Clara, who had promised herself she'd wait, who had told Nathaniel they'd come to it gently in time, looked at the old woman's honest face and understood that gently, and in time, did not mean never, and that Delia of all souls deserved to hear a true thing spoken plain, rather than managed and delayed for her own supposed good. She had spent 3 years being managed for her own good. She would not do it to Delia. When the hired man traced the money, Clara said carefully, he found something else, something older, a codicil to Nathaniel's father's will from 4 years back. Margaret made it disappear. The lawyer who drew it wouldn't say what it contained. He'd sworn an oath to a dead man, but he gave us 3 words to pass to whoever came asking honest. She took the old woman's hands. The words were, "Ask about Delia." Delia went very still. For a long moment, she said nothing at all. Her old hands trembled in Clara's, and her eyes went somewhere far off, 40 years off, and Clara held on and waited, and did not fill the silence, because she'd just learned from watching Nathaniel how much it mattered to let a person find their own words. "So he tried," Delia said at last, very soft. "The old master. He tried at the end to set it down proper, and she made sure it never saw the light." She laughed, but there were tears in it. "That woman, even that she took. Delia, you don't have to tell me. I only spoke it because I couldn't bear you not knowing your own life was in a paper somebody buried. But what it means is yours to keep or yours to tell. I'll not ask." The old woman was quiet a while longer. Then she squeezed Clara's hands and she made her choice, and it was her own. "I'll tell it," she said. "Once. To you because you're the only one who asked me kind, instead of asking me to save an estate. Then I'll decide who else hears it, and when. And that'll be mine to decide, same as your staying's yours." She drew a breath that shook. "I came to this house at 17. The old master was a widower and lonely, and I was young, and it's an old story, child, the oldest there is, and I'll not dress it up. There was a time one season before he married his second wife, nothing after. He did right by me in every way a man in his place could, which was to keep me on and keep me safe, and never once let me be turned out. But there was a child, Clara, a boy, born the winter after and taken from me to be raised as a foundling. The estate took in out of Christian charity, that was the story. And I let it be the story, because the truth would have ruined us both, and the boy worst of all." Clara's breath stopped. "Delia, the boy, grew up in this house. Under my eye every day of his life and never knowing, and me never telling, because I'd given my word, and because the world would have eaten him alive for it." Delia's tears ran freely now, 40 years of them. "Amos, child. My boy is Amos, the stable hand. My grandbabies are those 4 little ones he's so afraid of losing. The old master knew. That codicil, I'd wager my soul it left Amos a portion. A real portion. A father trying at the very last to give his son something the world had denied him. And Margaret buried it because a bastard son with a claim on Ashford land was a scandal she'd not have her family touched by, and because every dollar that went to Amos was a dollar that didn't stay in her reach." Clara sat down hard on the kitchen stool, because her legs would not hold her. "He was afraid of Nathaniel," she whispered. "Amos. He told me. He knew about the mill, the theft, all of it for 2 years, and he swallowed it because he was afraid of what Nathaniel would do to him. And all that time Nathaniel was his brother. Half-brother," Delia said. "And neither one knowing it." "Yes." She wiped her face with her apron. "Now you see why I said gentle. Now you see why some truths want handling like live coals. This one could burn down 3 lives if it's thrown careless, Amos's and his children's and Nathaniel's own. For the man's got to live with what his family did to his own blood." She gripped Clara's hands hard. "So, you asked me kind, and I've told you true. And now it's the 2 of us holding it, and I'm asking you woman to woman, what do we do with a thing like this?" Chatri. Clara sat with it a long moment. And then she did the thing she'd learned, the only thing she trusted anymore. "We don't decide for them," she said. "Not Amos, not Nathaniel. We don't manage it. We don't bury it kind the way Margaret buried it, cruel. A buried truth's a buried truth, however good the intention, and I'll not build my new life on a grave, even a gentle one. But we don't throw it either." She looked up. "We give it to Amos first. It's his life more than anyone's. He gets to be the first to know his own father's name, and the first to decide whether Nathaniel ever hears it, and the first to say whether he wants that codicil found and honored or left buried forever. It's his, all of it. We just carry it to him careful, and then we step back, and whatever he chooses, we hold to it." Delia looked at her a long, long time. "Your mama," she said, raised a queen, and didn't live to see it. They went to Amos together the next morning in the stable, and Clara stood back and let Delia speak, because it was hers to speak, and she watched a mother tell a grown man he was her son, and watched the man go to his knees in the hay. Not from grief, but from a lifetime of a question finally answered, and she did not intrude on it, and afterward she only said the one thing that was hers to say. "There's a paper, Amos, a codicil your father left you. It's buried, but it can be found and it can be honored, and if you want it, Nathaniel will honor it, I'll see to that. But it's yours to want or not. Nobody in this world gets to decide it for you. Not me, not your mother, not the man up at the house. You've spent your whole life being afraid of what powerful people would do to you. That's over. Starting now, you're the one who says." Amos wept and held his mother and did not answer that day, and Clara told him he didn't have to, that there was no clock on it, that the paper would keep, and the truth would keep, and his time was his own. He came to his answer a week later, and it was his entire. "Tell Mr. Ashford," Amos said. He'd steadied. There was something new in his spine. "Tell him the whole of it. Not for the land, I don't hardly know what I'd do with a portion of an estate. I'm a stableman, it's all I know. But I'll not have my children grow up as I did, not knowing whose blood's in 'em, ashamed of a thing that was never their doing. Let it be known, let it be plain. If it shames anybody, let it shame the ones that did the hiding, not the ones that got hid." He looked at Clara. "You taught me that, ma'am. Standing up in that hall. A body ought to be able to stand in the light and not be ashamed of the truth of what they are. I want that for my young ones. That's worth more in any portion of land." Chapter. Clara carried it to Nathaniel herself that evening in the study, where 3 years ago she'd stood at a closed door and heard her marriage die. She did not soften it. She'd learned that a truth softened for someone's good was just a lie wearing a kind face. She told him plain the codicil, the lawyer's 3 words. Delia's 40-year secret the boy raised as a foundling, the half-brother who'd mucked his stalls and been afraid of him his whole life. Nathaniel Ashford sat at his desk and heard it, and he did not interrupt, and he did not argue. And when she was done, he put his face in his hands, and for a long while, the only sound in the study was a proud man learning what his family had cost the people it should have protected. "My brother," he finally said muffled. "I've a brother, and I frightened him, for years. He knew I was robbing. He knew we were being robbed, and he was too afraid of me to say. And he was my own blood, and I never—" He looked up, wrecked. "How do I make that right, Clara? There's no ledger for that either. How does a man make that right?" "You don't make it right," Clara said. "You can't. Some things don't balance, Nathaniel, and the sooner you stop reaching for the column that squares them, the sooner you'll be some use to the people you hurt. You don't make it right. You just do right from here on, one day at a time, and you let them decide whether it's enough, and you don't get to demand the credit for it." She stepped closer to the desk than she had yet. "Honor the codicil. Give Amos his father's portion in the open with his name on it, and to the devil with the scandal, let the county talk they've talked about worse this month. Raise those 4 children as your blood because they are. And every day for the rest of your life when Amos speaks, you hear him. The way you finally learned to hear me. That's how. It's the only how there is." Nathaniel looked at her across the desk, and there were tears standing in the eyes of the coldest man in the county, and he did not wipe them away, and that too was new. "You came back to decide whether to stay," he said. "And instead you've spent a week teaching a broken family how to be honest. You didn't have to do a bit of it. It's not your blood. It's not your debt. You could have taken the wagon east the day your name was cleared and never looked back, and you'd have been right to. I know. Then why?" And Clara Whitmore stood in the study, where she'd once lost everything, and she gave him the truest answer she had, which was the only kind she gave anymore. "Because I found out I'd rather build a true thing than keep a safe one," she said. "In Marrow's Field I was safe. I was happy even in a small, careful way, and I could have stayed safe and happy and small the rest of my days, and no one would ever have hurt me again, because I'd never have let anyone close enough. But that's not living, Nathaniel. That's just not dying. And I watched you learn to sit in a chair and wait for a woman to speak, and I watched you offer to add your own name to a warrant, And I watched a family start to tell the truth to itself for the first time in 40 years, and I thought maybe a person can build a true thing here after all. Not a safe thing. A true one. And I've never in my life been able to walk away from a true thing half built. It's the same reason I couldn't leave those books unbalanced 3 years ago. I have to see the truth all the way through. It's the deepest thing in me. It's the thing you called madness. It was never madness, Nathaniel said quietly. It was the sanest thing in this whole house. I just wasn't man enough to know it. Chul. She stayed the summer deciding, and then the fall, and somewhere in there, the deciding quietly became a life, though neither of them named it out loud for a long while, because naming it too soon had been half of what ruined it before. She kept the books, and he paid her every quarter in her own name, and she made him hand it to her direct, and he did, and it stopped being strange, and started being simply how their house ran. She kept to the east wing. The ring stayed off her hand. And every evening she taught the county children piano in the great hall, Amos's 4 among them, now on a fine instrument Nathaniel had brought up from Richmond without a word, and set in the hall, and never once mentioned waiting for her to find it, which she did, and which she understood, and about which she said nothing either, because some gifts are best received in the same silence they were given. Margaret Ashford was tried in the fall, and convicted on the bank's own record, and the county that had bowed to her for 60 years did not send a soul to speak for her. She went away, and the estate did not miss her, and the mill roof got mended once properly, with real shingles Amos hauled and Amos laid, and it did not leak again. Carter left the county for good and was not pursued. Some justice is served best by simply letting a small man go, be small somewhere else. And Amos took his father's name in the open, and his portion with it, and moved his family from the stable cottage to a proper house on Ashford land that was now by right and by law and by his father's last true wish, partly his own. The county talked for a month. Then it stopped the way talk does, and Amos's children grew up knowing exactly whose blood was in them and were not ashamed of it. Not one day of their lives, which was the only inheritance Amos had ever truly wanted for them. It was near a year to the day, from the night she'd left, when Clara Whitmore made her last decision, and she made it the way she'd made every decision since the night she set the ring on the desk alone, clear-eyed, owing no one deciding for herself. She came to Nathaniel in the study one evening. He was at the desk, going over the quarter's accounts, her accounts in her clean and even hand. And he looked up, and he did the thing he'd taught himself to do, which was to set the pen down and give her his whole attention and wait. "I've decided," Clara said. He went still. He did not ask which thing. He did not fill the silence. He waited. "A year ago I set a ring down on this desk," she said, "because it had never once been the thing it was supposed to be. It was a price you paid for a girl who kept good books. It was never a promise, because you never made me one you meant. So." She reached into her pocket, and she took out the ring. She'd had it all along. She realized he'd never known that she'd taken it back off the desk that first morning before she left and carried it 60 miles east and 60 miles back. The one thing she'd said she wouldn't take and had never quite been able to leave. And she set it down on the desk between them, exactly where it had lain a year before. Nathaniel looked at it, and his face went carefully terribly blank, a man bracing for the blow. "Don't," Clara said, and almost smiled. "Look closer before you grieve." And he looked, and he understood, because the ring was not lying on the bare desk the way she'd left it a year ago, discarded, given back. It was lying in the center of her open palm. "I'm not giving it back to you," Clara said. "I gave it back once, and I meant it, and I'd do it again if I had to. This isn't that. A year ago, you put this on my hand, and it meant I've bought a thing that's useful to me. If it goes back on my hand, it's going to mean something else. And it's going to mean it because I decided freely, with my name clear and my wage in the bank and a wagon east standing ready any day I want it, which is the only way a promise like this was ever worth making." She held his eyes. "So I'm not asking you to marry me again, Nathaniel. We're already married. A paper says so. I'm telling you I've decided to stay married. On purpose. With my eyes open. which is a different thing entirely from the girl who did it 3 years ago because her father was dying and she had nowhere else to go. Nathaniel Ashford rose from his chair slow, and he came around the desk, and he stopped in front of her, and he did not reach for the ring, and he did not reach for her hand, and she saw that he was waiting even now, even here, to be told what she wanted, rather than deciding it for her. "What do you want me to do?" he said. "Not let me? Not I'll. Just waiting." "Nothing," Clara said. "That's the whole point. You don't put it on me. Not this time. Not ever again." And she took the ring from her own palm, and she slid it back onto her own finger, with her own hand, the way she'd taken everything back this whole hard year. Her name, her worth, her wage, her word by her own doing, and no one's leave. "There," she said quietly. "Now it's mine. Now it means what I say it means." Nathaniel Ashford looked at the ring on his wife's hand, put there by his wife's own hand, and then he looked at Clara, and he said the only thing left worth saying. "Then teach me what it means, every day, and I'll listen. I swear it on the only thing I've got left worth swearing on, which is that I finally know what it cost you to be right in a house full of people who wouldn't hear it." He drew a breath. "I heard you too late once. I'll not be late again. Not one day of the rest of my life." "See that you're not," Clara said. And this time, when the ghost of a smile crossed her face, she let it stay. That evening, as the light went long through the windows of the great hall, Clara Whitmore sat down at the piano Nathaniel had brought up from Richmond and never mentioned, and she took the broken ivory key out of the handkerchief she still carried, and she laid it on the music stand where she could see it, the one true note her mother had saved for her. The one thing she'd carried out of that house on the night everything ended, and back into it on the day everything began again. And she played. Both hands now. The whole song her mother had taught her all the way through, the way she hadn't been able to play it in 3 years because she'd had only the one broken key and the memory of the rest. Nathaniel Ashford sat down beside her, not to lead, not to decide, only to be near, and he did not speak, and he did not reach for her, and he listened. He listened to the whole of it, every note, the way he'd finally learned to listen to everything she said. And when the last note faded, he did not fill the silence after it. He let it ring out and fade on its own, complete the way a true thing is allowed to be. And Clara Whitmore, who had once stood at a closed door and heard her husband wish her unborn, who had set down her ring and walked into the dark with nothing but a broken key, and her own clear name, understood at last the thing she had crossed 120 miles and a whole year of her life to learn. Love does not survive because two people never break each other. It survives because, having broken, they choose every single day with their eyes open and their names clear, truth before pride, respect before power, and listening before judgment. She had not been rescued. She had not been saved. She had walked out on her own 2 feet and walked back on them and put the ring on with her own hand and cleared her own name with her own voice in a room full of people who'd come to bury her. She had been heard, and that in the end was the only thing she had ever needed, and the one thing once given freely and forever that no one would ever take from her again.